What's up everyone, back again with another meta discussion. So just a couple of warnings before we go into this. This is based on the data mine speculation that we have, so some of this is subject to change, but from what the looks of it, it's pretty reliable. So in this video I'm going to be discussing my thoughts on all the returning Pokemon that I think are going to make an impact on the Monotype meta. I have divided these up all into their respective types, which I will timestamp down below in the comments. So definitely check that out if you want to skip to the types you're only interested in, because this video is going to be long. As well as that, I am going to unfortunately repeat some sets. For example, if Pokemon appears on two types, I'll probably be discussing fairly similar things on both those types. So bear with me in that regard. So hopefully you enjoy, and definitely have a discussion down below on what you think of this format or what you think of the new DLC. I would like to know people's opinions on what they think is going to happen in the DLC and what types they're looking forward to playing. So with that, let's begin. So first up we have the Bug type, and in my opinion Bug was a bit of in a struggling position at the very start of the generation. It didn't have a huge amount of threats, despite the fact heavy duty boots was introduced, which definitely helped the type. But then in the first DLC pack we got Caesar, Volcarona, things like that back, which just helps so much. So unfortunately this time around Bug had its time to shine and it doesn't have a huge amount, but with that we do have Armaldo, and Armaldo doesn't really have any notable new moves in this DLC. However, it can be great as like a rapid spinner on the team. It can also throw down Stealth Rocks, which granted Bug does have a good access to entry hazards, but because Fortress isn't in this, I don't think they have any rapid spinner who can also throw down entry hazards, as well as that it can get like knockoff for team support and maybe like Earthquakes, Stone Edge, anything like that you want to run. So it definitely does, or Toxic, it definitely does have some like benefits on a team. It's not the best, it's decently bulky, 100 defense, and actually has very good attack at 125. Battle armor, meaning it cannot be struck by critical hits, so that can be pretty good against things like Urshifu, because the Wicked Blow won't be able to critical hit. So that could be quite nice. So overall, maybe not the best Pokemon, but I do see it having a niche on the Bug type, so that's going to be quite good. And next up we have Buzzwol. So Buzzwol did get a significant amount of new moves that are noteworthy, such as Close Combat. So Close Combat is definitely one of the best fighting moves, despite the fact it does lower your defense and special defense. It's just so strong and very accurate. Now if you look at like other fighting moves it used to have, Brick Break is significantly weaker, as well as Drain Punch, despite having a bit of utility in those two. Focus Punch is unreliable outside of like a sub build. Hammer Arm lowers your speed, which is not great, as well as being slightly weaker. Power Up Punch is significantly weaker, and Superpower lowers your attack, which means it's not as infinitely clickable as something like Close Combat. So I do see Close Combat being definitely quite nice on Buzzwol, and I expect that to be seen somewhat. So next up we have Darkest Lariat, and Darkest Lariat is nice because it is a dark type move. It will be nice for hitting ghost types who resist your fighting, who meet your fighting or resist your bug stab. So having that is quite nice, as well as being able to fend off things that want to maybe like bulk up or iron defense in your face. You can just ignore their defense stages. And finally we have Dual Wing Beat. Now Dual Wing Beat isn't the strongest, it's only 40 base by 2, so roughly 80 base I think, the maths works out that way. However, it can be nice to just kind of break sashes or sturdy, especially on a boosted Buzzwol, though I don't think Dual Wing Beat will be seen too much. I didn't want to completely ignore it. Now the role I see this serving on a team, I don't know if it's going to surpass Heracross for the role of a Moxie Sweeper, because I believe off the top of my head Heracross is slightly faster with base 85 and 125 attack, so it is slightly faster but slightly weaker than Buzzwol, and I think that speed tier really does matter, because even at a max speed plus speed nature, we'll see here Buzzwol's speed's only 282, which is okay, not the best. Even with a Scarf you won't be outspeeding a huge amount of the speed boosted tier. Granted, you will be outspeeding the majority of the unboosted tier. but paired with Sticky Web on, you know, a bug team, that could be quite nice. But I do see Buzzwol possibly being used as a very bulky revenge killer with like maybe max HP, max attack, and then you could run like bulk up, for example, and after every KO you get more attack. With this build I could see using Drain Punch over close combat because we don't want our defenses to drop, and Drain Punch gives us longevity, so definitely I do see some use for Buzzwol in the team, and I look forward to using it. We're going to jump to the next type. So next up we do have the Dark type, and unfortunately in this DLC the Dark type doesn't look like it's gotten too much new toys to play with, except the fact we do not know how good Galarian Moltres is going to be, so with that in mind, Dark could get a saving grace with that. We'll have to wait and see, and I will be covering the regional birds and the new Regis and Slowking all in a video, presumably closer to the time or when we know their stats spread and move pool and stuff. I am very much looking forward to doing that, so if you are interested, definitely subscribe and I will do that soon. So with that, we're going to jump right into the type and let's look at Spiritomb. So right off the bat, you might be thinking Spiritomb hasn't really seen much use in competitive in a long time, and you would be right in that, but with a slightly more limited dex and few other options, we maybe, just maybe, will see Spiritomb used on a Dark team because it is part Ghost type, which gives it an immunity to fighting, which is quite good on the Dark type. Save the fact your opponent has like Odor Sleuth or Scrappy, which we don't see too often in competitive. So with that, Spiritomb could see some nice use. It is quite defensive. Its HP leaves a lot to be desired with 50 base, but 108 in defense and special defense is quite nice. New moveset wise, it has Lash Out, which doubles in power if your opponent boosts stats this turn. So maybe against something like Caesar, for example, who wants to try Swords Dance in your face, you can lash out at them and do a good chunk of damage, despite the fact Spiritomb's attack isn't the best. If you do invest it, Lash Out, when it's doubled in power and stab, could be doing a decent chunk of damage. As well as that, it finally got a good physical ghost move in Poltergeist, which does use your opponent's item. And with Z Crystals and Megastones gone, we do see a lot of items being used in the tier. We will occasionally see berries like Cassid Berry, which will weaken the damage, or No Item Slowbro, which is occasionally used. But other than that, Poltergeist is quite a nice physical move. Now, moveset wise, like old movesets, it could run things like Pain Split, which is low HP, to gain a lot of HP back. It does have access to Nasty Plot, Memento, just some good kind of team support here. And importantly, it has Infiltrator, so you could even like Infiltrator Will-O-Wisp things like Dragapult, or any other sub-setter-uppers in the tier. Even taunt them with Infiltrators, that is quite nice. Or Toxic, maybe a Toxic on Volcarona who wants to sub in your face, because this thing is part Ghost type. It takes neutral damage from like Bug Buzz, for example, and with decent special defense it could potentially live and just click Toxic and put it on a timer, or even trick a Choice Scarf behind a sub. All this kind of stuff could be quite nice with the type. As well as that, it does have access to Pressure if you want a Pressure stalling PP Pokemon, with its nice defensive stats, and Pain Split to give it some longevity. So next up we do have Guzzlord, and I don't necessarily think Guzzlord is going to be an amazing addition to the team. Unfortunately, due to its Dragon typing, it is 4x weak from Fairy, which can be kind of difficult for the team to deal with. That said, its HP stat is absurdly massive, clocking in at 650 HP when you invest it, which is just crazy. As well as that, it's quite strong to boot, so if you give it an Adamant Nature, for example, it hits 331 attack, which is quite nice, and it is going to be boosted after a Beast Boost as well, so bear that in mind. New moveset wise, we have Heat Crash, and this thing is heavy. I looked it up earlier, I think it's over 800 kilos, so that is going to hit super hard with Heat Crash, especially good for like just sitting on things like bug types in the tier, which give you hassle, sitting on Caesar, other bug types. Even Volcarona will take a lot of damage from this, I believe, and they probably won't be able to win a KO because the HP is just ridiculous. Like, let's run a quick damage calc here with Guzzlord. We'll just blank set, max HP, I think it's Volcarona, so that's Volcanion. I always get that mixed up. So we're going to make it an offensive Quiver Dancer. Looks like a +2 So unfortunately Bug Buzz does KO +2. +1 it does too. So unfortunately it is not as nice as I was hoping for it to be. So it's good I ran this calc before spreading nonsense. But even still, Adamant Hit is still going to be doing 56 to 64. So maybe not great against something like Corona, but against things like Caesar, it can easily live a Bullet Punch or even a U-turn and Heat Crash anything that comes in. Now, old moveset wise, it does have access to a Dragon Tail, which is good for phasing out your opponent and hopefully stacking entry hazard damage. Earthquake is always nice to have as a bit of coverage. Gyro Ball, because the thing is quite slow, he could be hitting fairy types quite nicely on a swap in, for example, or Poison Jab. Now, as I said, this thing probably isn't going to be amazing in the Dark team or the Dark type, but I wanted to put it there just in case, as I think it may see some small bit of usage. So we're going to move on to the next type. So next up we have Dragon type, which I know is a lot of people's favourite type. It's a very popular type, and I think until this point in the generation, the team was slightly limited in its scope of options. That's not to say it was a bad type, because it was a good type. However, I do think it was lacking some key options, and now thanks to the DLC, I really don't think that's going to be the case anymore. So let's jump right into the Pokemon. So first up we do have Dragonite, and Dragonite is just one of the most iconic dragon types, I would think, maybe because I grew up with Generation 1, I think that. But Dragonite is just so useful on the Dragon type team. With its ability Multiscale, it halves damage when it's at full HP, and ordinarily this could have been a slight bit of an issue to get off because Stealth Rocks were annoying in the tier. It would chip Dragonite down to 75%, but no longer. With the access to heavy duty boots, Dragonite is going to swap in and pretty much guaranteed to be on full HP, meaning you can always live in it, hopefully usually always live in attack with multi-scale, even Ice Beams, which are 4 by effective. Dragonite is quite bulky with a nice HP tier, and the multi-scale will half the damage, so we will often see Dragonite just be able to hang on to a super effective hit like that. Moveset wise, new movesets, we have Fire Spin. Now Fire Spin seems like an odd one for me to add because it is very weak. I think it's 35 base, but it does trap for 4 to 5 turns. And what this lets you do is kind of trap stallers like maybe Toxapex to stop it swapping out, getting regeneration, or other things like Amoonguss, which maybe the type can struggle with. So Fire Spin allows you to trap those and take chip damage every turn, and with that you can slowly whittle them down. Next up we have Break and Swipe. So Break and Swipe isn't the best move, I think it's only 60 base, but it does guarantee lower your opponent's attack status stage. So I'm putting it there in case you want to run a more maybe team supportive Dragonite or bulky Dragonite, which will help it live thanks to Break and Swipe. And we got Dual Wing Beat because in this point in the series, Dragonite's flying moveset was kind of lackluster, having only Fly being its strongest move, but unfortunately that is a 2-turn move which can easily be countered with the likes of Protect or Scouting and swapping out, so it's not the best, especially with Z Crystals gone. So Dual Wing Beat can give it a nice secondary stab outside of its dragon typing. And old moveset wise, it just has so much going for it. It can be a defogger with heavy duty boots and multiscale, which can help the dragon type a lot because we are missing some defoggers in the tier. It can run Priority and Aqua Jet, for example. You can run Dragon Dance, you can run Outrage, Extreme Speed, Earthquake, Fire Punch. This thing's move pool is just, it has no shortage of great moves, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what people are going to run with the new Dragonite. Now next up we have Salomons. Salomons can also run heavy duty boots like its friend Dragonite because it is part flying type, but it did benefit a lot from the new moves. Again, it got Dual Wing Beat because similarly to Dragonite, until this point in the game, I believe it didn't have any fantastic flying moves, and that's not to say Dual Wing Beat is amazing, but as I said, flying is a 2-turn move, which is unfortunate when the likes of Protect, Scouting exist in singles now, or they can swap into a Resist, or they can swap into something like Rocky Helm and you take a lot of chip damage. So Dual Wing Beat does offer you that immediate bit more threatening on that turn. Break and Swipe again is good for lowering attack, can be paired nicely with maybe Intimidate if you want to lower your opponent's attack 2 stages before maybe setting up some Dragon Dances in their face, for example. And next up we have Scale Shot. So Scale Shot is a multi-hit move that increases your attack. Now, it isn't the most reliable move in the tier, I will not deny that, but it could be paired nicely with Moxie. So you could come in on a weakened Pokemon and click Scale Shot, and if they get KO'd, you get a speed stage thanks to Scale Shot, and you get an attack stage thanks to Moxie. This is essentially a Dragon Dance without having to Dragon Dance in your opponent's face, and you get a KO while doing so, letting Salomons snowball into quite a threatening Pokemon. Now, I do have to mention that Scale Shot does lower your defense if it activates, so bear that in mind if you're trying to use it in front of a Pokemon or a team that has heavy priority, that you are going to be weaker to things like maybe Bullet Punch, Quick Attack, things like that, Extreme Speed, so do bear that in mind if you are running this set. EV-wise or stat spread-wise, Salomons has always made a fantastic Moxie Sweeper, which is something Dragon has kind of been lacking. It's been lacking like a huge snowball in offense until this point. So let's run, for example, a Jolly Nature with max attack. With Choice Scarf, this hits quite fast, and after every KO we do get a Moxie boost, which is going to be very helpful for the type, especially if they are weakened due to your overwhelming BST on the rest of your dragons. So next up we have the Lottie Twins, and they are both back, and they both got a very similar new moveset with Mystical Fire, Aura Sphere, and Future Sight. Now this is fantastic because Hidden Power Fire is gone. Mystical Fire is a great replacement. I'd argue an even better replacement because it does lower your opponent's special attack as well as having slightly higher base stat. So that is going to be fantastic for the Lottie Twins. I'm going to be discussing these two in tandem because they have similar roles, I feel, with Latios being slightly more defensive and Latios being slightly more offensive. So Mystical Fire, as I said, is great for those steel types in the tier. Next up we have Aura Sphere. That is fantastic for them because to this point I think they would run in, they just had Hidden Power Fire. I thought they had Focus Blast, but they didn't. So that gives them a fantastic, reliable fighting coverage for, again, things like steel types, normal types, rock types, there's ice types, there's so many things in the tier that hits, like ice types especially, is a huge one that also Mystical Fire hits. So what they could do is potentially even run like an agility set, agility Calm Mind perhaps, with their fantastic speed tier of 110 and their nice bulk in 110 to 130 for Latios, or the 130-110 if you want the more offensive Latios. They could be running that against like steel teams or running it against ice teams and being able to potentially sweep through them. Now, next up we have Future Sight, and Future Sight is fantastic because it's one of the most controlling moves in the game, as in it limits your opponent's swap-ins heavily. So you can click Future Sight and basically say, hey, you can't swap into this Pokemon this turn, otherwise you're going to be taking a Future Sight and dying. Or maybe they're going to swap into a Dark type, for example, to ease it up, and on that turn you can predict that and click Aura Sphere, or you can click a Dragon Dance on one of your allies' dragons to try and get a boost and start snowballing. So that's going to be fantastic for the team. I would say Latios is probably going to be slightly better, as it is slightly more offensive and can run nice like Calm Mind sets. But that's not to say Latios' extra defenses won't be beneficial. Old moveset wise, we do have things like, as I said, Calm Mind, Defog, which is always nice for a dragon team because we do lack some defoggers. Draco Meteor for hitting really hard. Energy Ball for dealing with those pesky water ground types in the tier. Healing Wish if you want some like wish support that can pass into maybe Dragonite that's weakened, or maybe like your Garchomp, or even Hydreigon, Kyurem. There's so many huge threatening Pokemon in the tier that would love to be passed a Healing Wish. Other than that, we have Recover for longevity, Refresh to remove things like Toxic and Paralysis, Roost again for longevity, Thunder Wave for team support, Tailwind for team support. Their moveset just goes on and on and on, and to be honest, I'm really looking forward to using these Latties back in the Dragon type. So last but not least, we do have Garchomp, and Garchomp was always one of the defining Dragon members, I thought. It's just so strong, with 130 base attack and a relatively impressive 102 base speed. This thing scared so many types, and Dragon has one of its best Stealth Rockers back, so it has access to Stealth Rock, it has access to Swords Dance, Roar, Earthquake. There's just so much Garchomp can do, and it can run Rough Skin, for example, Rocky Helm, letting your opponent take massive damage if they try and like U-turn out on the team, or maybe click priority like Extreme Speed or Bullet Punch. Garchomp just punishes them heavily just by taking a hit. Now, moveset wise, we also have Break and Swipe, which I'm listing, and I don't think it's going to be exactly tier defining, but I would like to see maybe Garchomp trying to run a defensive set with Break and Swipe. It could be very interesting. And on top of that, we do have Scale Shot. As I explained earlier with Salomons, Scale Shot could be great for clicking Swords Dance, because until this point in the game, Garchomp had no way of reliably increasing its speed. So we could run Swords Dance in Garchomp, for example, to boost its already scary attack to well over 700. And with that, we can click Scale Shot, which is going to do a ton of damage now due to this thing being boosted in attack to well over 700, because this is Stab. It hits multiple times, potentially breaking Sash or Sturdy, and on top of that, it increases its speed. And if we are running, for example, a Max's Speed Jolly Nature, it hits 333 speed, so after a speed boost, this is going to be outspeeding a huge chunk of the already speedy tier, especially after some Scarf boosts or +1 boosts. So Garchomp could see itself being a very scary sweeper in the late game. So let's jump on to the next team. So next up we have Electric type, which is one of my favourite types to play. For those of you who have watched my content before, you've probably heard me say that so many times now. So I am really excited to try out the new Electric Pokemon that are coming back in this Monotype. And a lot of them have a lot of new moves and a lot of good Pokemon returning, so I do think Electric is going to be one of the bigger threatening types in the new meta. So let's jump right into the first Pokemon, which is going to be Zapdos. Now the reason Zapdos is so important in the Electric type is because it is Flying type, which means it carries an immunity to Earthquake or other ground attacks. And that is super important because until now we've had to rely on things like Air Balloon or Levitator in the form of Rotom, which didn't do anything in the face, for example, Excadrill. However, Zapdos can be played quite defensively, even though it only has 85 defense. Its nice 90 HP, as well as access to things like Roost, means it can be played very defensively. And more importantly, it has Static. So what Static allows you to do is paralyze any Pokemon that comes in contact with you, which is a 30% chance, but for those of you who ever fought Zapdos, it's pretty much a 100% chance. Like, I get Static by Zapdos so often. And one of the biggest things for Zapdos this generation is it can run heavy duty boots. So it doesn't have to worry about coming in on Stealth Rocks time and time again and chipping it away, which makes it even better as a defensive wall on the Electric type. Now, new moveset wise, we have Rising Voltage, and that is fantastic because the team is going to be hopefully running Electric Terrain, which is one of the big things Electric types like to do. And the reason I chose Rising Voltage is you might be thinking, oh, Zapdos is a flyer, it won't be affected by Rising Voltage. How Rising Voltage works is if the opponent is touching the ground, it's double in power. So it doesn't matter the fact that Zapdos is flying and is not grounded. The Rising Voltage will still do double damage, assuming your opponent isn't a flyer or a levitator, etc. And it got Air Slash and Hurricane. So this is so good for the Electric type. Until now, let's just look at what Zapdos' coverage was. Hidden Power Flying and Air Cutter, and Hidden Power is gone, so pretty much it only had Air Cutter to this point when it comes to special flying attacks. But now it has Air Cutter and Hurricane, which can make use of its amazing 125 special attack. So not only is this a great secondary stab, what this is super important for is the Grass matchup, which is one that Electric kind of struggles with. Because Electric types do have fairly limited coverage, having this flying stab is super important. Finally, we have Weatherball, and Weatherball might be a bit of a strange one because it's probably not going to be see the most usage, but we could see it on maybe a Rain Dance Electric team. And the reason I say this is because in Rain, things like Hurricane will never miss, Thunder will never miss, which obviously is going to be Stab from your entire team. And really importantly, this Weather Ball will turn to a 100 base water move, being able to absolutely clean through things like ground type teams, which obviously give the team hassle. Now, as I said, it's probably not going to be the most used tech in the game, but I could see it being used on certain electric teams to catch your opponent off guard. Next up we have Raikou. So Raikou is a returning Pokemon but has a lot of new moves attached to it. Most importantly, Rising Voltage and Scald. I have no idea why they chose to give this thing Scald, but I'm not going to complain. So Scald gives you a nice option against ground types, as well as potentially being able to burn them. This is especially good against things like Hippo Down, Excadrill, things that want to use like physical attacking Earthquakes. Stat-wise, it's quite nice at 115, makes it quite strong and bulky. Ability-wise, we also have Inner Focus, which makes you immune to flinch, which probably won't come into play too often, but you never know when you're going to fight maybe a Iron Head Pokemon or Air Slash Pokemon. And granted, both of those are not very effective against electric types, but some opponent, maybe you're backed into a corner and they just have to rely on some flinches. Thanks to Inner Focus, you won't be able to flinch, or you could run Pressure as well if you want to try and pressure your opponent's PP out. So other than that, we have Weatherball, like I discussed a minute ago at Zapdos. This could be paired nicely with a Rain Dance team, which I don't see being used too often, but I'm not going to rule it out completely. And finally we have Aura Sphere, which was previously, I believe, event exclusive. So now that is in its regular move pool, so that's going to be pretty nice. Next up we have Thunderous, and Thunderous is going to be really good because, again, much like Zapdos, it provides a proper ground immunity to the team, which is super important. Now I do think this is going to be a slightly more offensive variant than Zapdos, as we can see its defenses are significantly weaker as well as its HP, but it has the same special attack and a decent bit more speed. On top of that, it does have Prankster, so Prankster is going to be really good for like Prankster Defogs, for example, if your team doesn't want to rely on Zapdos or Rotom to defog, for example. New moveset wise, we do have Rising Voltage and Weatherball, very similar to Raikou and Zapdos, so there's not too much new to cover there. We can also run Defiant if for some reason you want to run a physically offensive Thunderous, which can be done because its physical attack is almost as good as a special attack. As we know, the electric type does struggle a bit to find physical attackers, so that could be quite nice. Old moveset wise as well, we can run Grass Knot, for example, against things like ground types, or super importantly, which makes this a lot more offensive than Zapdos, it does have Nasty Plot. We can run Knockoff if we're running a physical variant, or a Sludge Bomb for those annoying grass types, or even Prankster Taunt as an opening, or a mid-game sweeper to stop walls from just setting up in your face. We have Prankster Thunder Wave, U-turn to grab momentum. There's just so much that Thunderous can do. And I forgot to mention when talking about Zapdos, so I'm going to quickly jump back here and say if you don't want to run Rising Voltage on Zapdos, you can also run things like Discharge. And the reason I say Discharge is because there's a 30% chance to paralyze, which is fantastic on defensive Zapdos because it naturally has good speed, and after a paralysis it's probably outspeeding pretty much any non-Choice Scarf threat in the tier. So next up we have Tapu Coco, and I am so excited to use Tapu Coco again. It has always been my favourite Tapu, as well as being a fantastic electric surge setter. So what this lets you do is basically put down electric terrain, which obviously helps your entire team. Things like Rising Voltage, it prevents sleep on your team, it allows you to activate your Surge Surfer on Raikou, as well as generally increasing your stab across the board. So that is super good as an auto setter. So it's going to do what Pincurchin does and set up electric terrain. Unfortunately, unlike Pincurchin, it does not have access to entry hazards. However, what it does have is way more speed. At base 130, this thing is going to be seriously fast, outspeeding a ton of the tier. As you can see here at 394, and that's not to say its attack is bad for not investing. It has 115 base attack, and as I said, electric types can struggle finding physical attackers, but that's not going to be the case anymore, because Tapu Koko got Close Combat and Play Rough, which is insane coverage. So Play Rough is fantastic Fairy Stab, and we no longer have to run Dazzling Gleam if we do want to run a physically attacking Tapu Koko. On top of that, it does have physical electric moves, I believe, in Wild Charge. Unfortunately, it didn't get Bolt Peak, which makes sense. It is a signature move, and this thing I would think would be instant banned with that, so I am in a way happy to see that. We have Rising Voltage as well, if you just want to make a specially attacking Tapu Koko, which can instantly put the hurt on your opponents. And finally, we have Misty Explosion, which might seem like a bit of a strange one, because it will kill your Tapu Koko, and it won't even be boosted because you won't be running Misty Surge. So the reason I think Tapu Koko could potentially run Misty Surges, it could get its terrain down, and on an opponent that wants to defog, explode in their face and prevent them from getting the defog up, which lets you swap into something like Raikou and commence a sweep. Now I don't necessarily recommend this, but I think it could be an interesting tech. With that, I must mention, the problem with running things like Defog on Zapdos or Thunderous is it does now remove terrain, so do bear that in mind if you are going to be running Defog on a electric team. So, old moveset wise, this thing had so much it could do. Physically, it ran Brave Bird, which is fantastic flying coverage. It had Iron Head, great for things like rock types, fairy types. It could run Thunder Punch or Wild Charge or U-Turn. Its moveset was pretty good and only got better now with the DLC, so I am really looking forward to seeing if Tapu Koko will stay in the tier first of all, or will it prove itself too strong, and if it does stay in the tier, how much of an asset it's going to be for the electric type. Next up we have Circuitry, and Circuitry, much like other Ultra Beasts, simply is going to be a snowballing monster. So you might be looking at special attack and thinking, oh my, that is strong. And it is. This thing has 173 base special attack, which to be honest is kind of absurdly strong. Now what it can do with the special attack is utilize its beast boost to raise its special attack a stage every time it scores a KO. And with its okay speed tiering, especially with a plus speed nature, it hits 291 speed. With Choice Scarf, this can be fantastic as a late game sweeper, as every beast boost will continuously make you stronger. Unfortunately, it did lose Hidden Power Ice in this generation, so that will hurt it a bit for dealing with things like ground types. That said, its new moves in Rising Voltage, again not much to explain here, can be fantastic against enemy teams, especially when you have electric terrain up, and Endure. And you're going to hear me talk about Endure a few times with the Ultra Beasts, and the reason I'm going to talk about Endure is because I think you could run Endure Slackberry. So what that lets you do is take a hit, guarantee live on 1 HP, and activate your Slackberry, which is effectively the same as activating a Choice Scarf, increasing your speed a stage. However, this does not choice lock you into one move. So as for old moves, we could be running Energy Ball, for example. We could run Dazzling Gleam for Dark and Dragon types, Energy Ball obviously for ground types, or the ground water types, and finally maybe like Thunderbolt for great stab. So this right here could look absolutely terrifying, and after one KO, it suddenly gets a special attack raise and becomes even bigger of a monster. Now, the one thing you do have to worry about is that it's very susceptible to priority because it does not have a way of healing itself after the Slackberry activates. So do bear that in mind. Or if you want to go crazy, we could run like Slackberry Tail Glow, and this would just be absolutely terrifying because the Tail Glow raises your special attack by 3 stages, putting this well over 1,000 after one single Tail Glow, which is going to be pretty much untankable unless for like the best special walls in the game, like maybe Eevee, chance you could stand up against it. But other than that, after a couple of Tail Glows, Circuitry is just going to smash through walls. So that is going to be it for electric type. I am really looking forward to using it, so do let me know what you think about that, and we're going to jump into the next type. We'll be right back. So next up we have Mono Fairy. So I do think Mono Fairy got quite a good few new tools, namely the Tapus. So the Tapus are set to come back in the DLC, and this is going to be pretty game changing for the Mono Fairy type, assuming they do stay in the tier. So we're going to go over what I think the new Pokemon, kind of what role they're going to fit. So first off, we do have Diancie. Now unfortunately Mega Diancie is not back, but I do think regular Diancie can be quite a threat. It does have a 600 BST, which is pretty good. Its HP and speed leave a bit to be desired, but it actually has fantastic bulk on the defense and special defense side of 150 in both, and not bad attack. Now, new moveset wise, we do have Mystical Fire, which is going to be fantastic for taking care of steel types in the tier, and obviously we know the fairy type doesn't like dealing with steel type too much, so it is nice to have that, as well as lowering the opponent's special attack, which will help Diancie live more. We do have Encore, which could be good against setup Pokemon. I don't necessarily see Diancie being used as anti-setup because I think it's more of a defensive Pokemon itself, but we could see use for Encore. Next up we have Body Press, and Body Press is really good because it lets us just basically invest fully in defense. Let's say we're going to go max defense nature. At 438, this Body Press is going to hit quite hard, and it means we don't have to invest anything in our attack to do that. And next up we do have Meteor Beam. Now I don't really see Meteor Beam being used over the likes of Power Gem, for example, because it is a one charge move, but if you want to use a Y-type Diancie, it is possible to use that, so I put it there just in case. Now with regards to old moves, that pairs very nicely with Body Press is actually Diamond Storm, because Diamond Storm has a 50% chance to raise your defense by 2 stages. So what this lets us do is make your defense well over 800, meaning Body Press is going to absolutely squish steel types, normal types like Chansey, for example, ice types, basically anything weak to fighting is going to be absolutely squished by Body Press. Now in this case we could run maybe a minus speed nature because we need some attack for the Diamond Storm, and we could run maybe Calm Mind and Moonblast with some leftovers and maybe max HP. So my rationale behind this is like the Calm Mind could easily boost your special defense and special attack, making you a lot more bulky, and your Moonblast is hit more. Then you can hit Diamond Storm on things that are neutral, potentially increasing your defense to really high levels, which also allows your Body Press to be much more powerful. So this could be an interesting set, like it's not walled out by steel types because you have Body Press, despite the fact they were just Fairy and Rock. So that's just a quick idea of what we could see Diancie using. And let's move on to Tapu Koko. So Tapu Koko, as we saw in the electric part, got so many new moves, and most of them are physical, or 2 of them are physical, in close combat and play rough. So that is super good because Tapu Koko has an amazing speed tier, as you can see here, while also having fairly impressive attack. Unfortunately, prior to this it didn't have an amazing physical move pool, but now I would say it does have an amazing physical move pool because we can run Wild Charge, we can run U-Turn, Brave Bird, Play Rough, Close Combat. All that kind of stuff is just super good. Or if you just want to go for a straight up like really powerful electric wall breaker, we can use Electric Surge, Rising Voltage, maybe Volt Switch, things like that. So Tapu Koko does boost its electric stab, but as well as that, it prevents some of your Pokemon on your team from falling asleep thanks to electric terrain. So that could be used as pretty good team support. Next up we have Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Bulu is just going to be absolutely insane, I think. So I see a lot of people debating who's going to be better, Tapu Bulu or Rillaboom, and originally I thought probably going to be Rillaboom because Tapu Bulu does have a 4 by weakness to poison and like a weakness to steel, which I thought was going to be pretty big. But I kind of thought more about it, and Tapu Bulu is stronger than Rillaboom, so he has that immediate bit of strength. So with a max attack adamant, he gets 394 attack, which is huge. And you might be thinking its speed isn't that good, which it isn't. Even like with max speed, it's not very fast. But what it got in the DLC is Grassy Glide. So Grassy Glide is a 70 base grass move that has priority in Grassy Surge. And what does Rillaboom do? Sorry, what does Tapu Bulu do? It sets up Grassy Surge upon entering the field. So not only is this fantastic team support, giving your whole team passive recovery on things like Diancie and Klefki, for example, are 2 things that would really appreciate this passive HP support healing, as well as weakened earthquakes, which can be really, really good. So when it has Grassy Surge up, it can just start clicking Grassy Glides, and these things is going to hit like a truck. It's going to hit so hard. Now on top of that, it got really good new moves like High Horsepower, and the reason High Horsepower is nice over Earthquake is because your Grassy Surge does weaken your Earthquake, but this High Horsepower will allow you to hit like Steel type super effectively, which is really, really nice. Next up, it finally got a proper Fairy move in Play Rough, which again, coming off this thing's massive attack, is going to hit seriously hard. And finally we have Close Combat. Close Combat does offer you that immediate bit more power than High Horsepower. As well as that, it will hit like things like Flying Steel types in the tier or Ferrothorn super effectively, which is really good. Now unfortunately it does lower your defense and special defense, making Tapu Bulu a little bit less bulky in the long run. But it used to have to run superpower, and Close Combat is the exact same base power, but with the added drawback of not having lower your attack instead of your special defense, which makes close combat much more clickable. You can just click it like over and over. As for old moves, it's still like its bulk up. It gets Swords Dance, I believe. Yes, it does. Stone Edge for hitting maybe like flying types. We could run Mega Horn in case, for every reason, you want bug coverage. Horn Leech for great longevity, as well as maybe Grassy Glide. So this thing used to have a decent move pool, but now I would say it had a great move pool. And with Grassy Glide, it's simply going to be amazing in the tier, I feel. So let's move on to Tapu Fini. Unfortunately, Tapu Fini probably got the least of the Tapus with regards to its terrain move in Misty Explosion. It didn't get like Grassy Glide or Rising Voltage, but that's not to say it didn't gain a lot. So what it gained is Flip Turn, which is going to be great for grabbing momentum. So you could take in your Tapu Fini and then maybe they take in their Heatran to wall you out. It's not Heatran, that's obviously they wouldn't take in Heatran. They take in maybe like Ferrothorn to wall you out, and you could like Flip Turn into something else, or you could Flip Turn off a myriad of swap-ins to Tapu Fini and grabbing momentum and maybe going to like Tapu Bulu or Tapu Coco or something and getting in like a really fast threatening Pokemon who doesn't really like to swap in. Next up we have Draining Kiss, and Draining Kiss I can already see being fantastic as a Moonblast alternative. While it is a lot less powerful immediately, it does have, I believe, 75% HP drain, which is just insane. So Tapu Fini, after some Calm Minds for example, could become super bulky and have great longevity. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what it can do with that. And as I said, it does have Misty Explosion. So for Misty Explosion, I'm not gonna say it's gonna have the most use, but I can see it being used as an immediate wall breaker because it doubles in power, I believe, when used in the Misty Surge terrain. In the Misty terrain, sorry, I said Misty Surge terrain, it doubles in power, so, and it's going to be stab on top of that. So with this could see like a fantastic wall break, like maybe they swap into something your team absolutely hates dealing with, you just click Misty Explosion. Not only do you grab momentum coming in, if they don't get KO'd, but on top of that, it can just absolutely wall break something, as I said, your team doesn't really want to have to deal with, so that could be nice. As for old movesets, we still have a Calm Mind, Defog, Haze could be fantastic on the team. Iron Defense, we could see some nice use with this. Just a whole lot of things like Surf, Scald, Taunt, Trick. Tapu Fini has always been a good wall breaker, and I don't think that role has changed, but now I think it can break walls or stop stalling, as well as grabbing momentum. So I do have to say, if you are using Defog now on your Fairy team, do bear in mind that Defog will remove your terrains. So that is an important thing to note when running Defog. Now you're probably thinking, where's Tapu Lele? You didn't put Tapu Lele there. Tapu Lele is going to be amazing. And yes, that's exactly why I didn't put Tapu Lele here, because I am 99% certain this thing is going to get banned. I believe it was banned in the previous generation's Monotype for just being a bit too strong, and this time it got Expanding Force, which is just going to turn it up to 11. I just think this thing is going to be too strong for the Monotype tier, and unfortunately I do think it's going to be banned, so that is why I have excluded Tapu Lele. So we're going to pause there and we're going to jump on to the next type. I will be right back. So next up we do have the Fighting type, and if you're here looking for fighting, I'm very sorry to say there is not much here to look for. All we have back with regards to the old Pokemon is Buzzwol. Now we do have, I believe, Galarian Zapdos is going to be Fighting type, so perhaps that will change things immensely and maybe like redefine the type. But with regards to Buzzwol, let's jump right into it. So similar to Mono Bug, I believe it serves a similar purpose that Heracross does. However, Heracross is that immediate bit faster, which is quite nice. However, is not as strong or bulky as Buzzwol. So they do serve a similar purpose. They can both be like Choice Scarf Moxie boosters, or in Buzzwol's case a Choice Scarf Beast booster, to increase its attack every time it scores a KO. New moveset wise, we do have Close Combat, which is fantastic because we no longer have to run things like Superpower or Hammer Arm or the weaker like Drain Punch, for example. So that is really, really nice. Close combat is definitely a bit more spammable against like steel types, against normal types, against basically every type in the game. Close combat is a bit more spammable because it doesn't lower our attack a stage. Next up we have Darkest Lariat, and Darkest Lariat could be nice for taking care of like ghost types, for example, which fighting can struggle a small bit with as they are immune to our stab. The Darkest Lariat can be quite nice to just hit those super effectively, while also having the added effect of ignoring defense stages. So if your opponent is running like an iron defense body presser, for example, Darkest Lariat can be used to just wall break that and ignore their defense boosts, which is quite good. So then we have Dual Wing Beat, and Dual Wing Beat is not the strongest move ever, it's only 40 base by 2, but it can be nice against things like opposing fighting types or opposing bug types. And the fact Buzzwol is bug itself means it does resist fighting types, and the Dual Wing Beat can do some significant damage back to them, as well as being good against bug types because, as I just stated, the bug types do resist fighting, so Dual Wing Beat can be used to kind of break through those. Now for old movesets, we do still have Bulk Up, which is going to be very good because this thing's defense is monstrously high. And we could see this thing being quite bulky. Ice Punch could be nice for hitting like dragons. We do have Leech Life, which is really good for hitting psychic types while also recovering HP. Lunge to lower your opponent's attack if you want a slightly more like defensive Buzzwol. Power Up Punch can be paired nicely with Beast Boost to get like 2 stages of attack. I don't know if this thing gets Fell Stinger. It does get Fell Stinger, so you can get potentially 4 stages of attack KOing with Fell Stinger, which is just stupid good, especially against like slower defensive teams. So I definitely think Buzzwol isn't just a carbon copy of Heracross. It serves a different purpose for the most part. I think Heracross is a slightly better Moxie Choice Scarf Sweeper, but I think Buzzwol is a much better wall breaker or defensive wall in itself. Now unfortunately, its special defense leaves a lot to be desired, and its typing isn't the best defensively. It doesn't really bring any notable resistances to the type. It's still weak to flying, fairy, psychic, as well as being weak to like fire. So unfortunately, defensively, it's not the best with regards to resistances, but we do have huge bulk, so I do think we'll see some use of that. So we're going to pause there till we look at the next type. I'll be right back. So next up we do have Fire type, and Fire type did get a decent few new tools to deal with, so let's jump right into them, starting with Moltres. So you might be thinking, Moltres has never really been like used too often previously in mono fire teams, so why all of a sudden is this a big thing to come back? And it's simple, like every other fire type, it loves heavy duty boots. So it can now constantly swap into like Stealth Rocks and not care at all. Ability wise, we have another Flame Body user if you want to hopefully like burn your entire opponent's team, or we have Pressure to PP stall. Stat spread wise, this thing is strong with 125 special attack, and it's decently bulky with 19, 90, 85 and quite fast at 90. So this thing I think will definitely have some use on the tier, and moveset wise we have Mystical Fire, which obviously isn't as strong as like Flamethrower or Fire Blast or like Weatherball in the Sun, for example. However, it does have the added effect of lowering your opponent's special attack, in case you do want to run a more bulky Moltres, so that's quite good. And as well as that, like a lot of other fire types, it got Scorching Sands, and Scorching Sands is going to be really good against like threatening rock types. Like maybe Tyranitar wants to swap into this, and you click Scorching Sands, not only is it taking a super effective damage, there's also now a 30% chance it gets burned, and a burned Tyranitar is really awful for them if they're a physical attacker, or any physical attacker coming and getting burnt is really not nice for them, so that will be quite a nice tool for Moltres. Old moveset wise, we still have like Air Slash as a flying type for dealing with like fighting types, for example. Extra Sensory if you want to run a psychic move for maybe poison types. Hurricane, unfortunately this is lowered accuracy in the Sun, so I won't necessarily recommend this. Overheat is a good wall breaker, so Will-O-Wisp, Whirlwind as a team support, Tailwind is team support, so I believe it also gets Roost for longevity, so Moltres could be seen as a pretty bulky like Earthquake immunity on the team, which can be quite nice for the fire type. Now next up we have Entei, and Entei got Flare Blitz and Scorching Sands. Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend running Scorching Sands because the fire type has no shorter special attackers. The Flare Blitz is undeniably quite nice, being an extremely powerful 120 base stab coming off 115 attack, which is quite strong. As well as that, you could run maybe like max speed, and just for, hypothetically, let's say we're running a Choice Band Entei. Suddenly, Flare Blitz in the sun with Choice Band is going to hit really hard. And you might be thinking, why run this over something like Darmanitan? Well, first of all, it offers that tiny bit more speed than Darmanitan, if that is important, if you want to outspeed some important speed tiers. But more importantly, it now has Inner Focus. And why is Inner Focus important? It's not only that it can't flinch, which is pretty good against things like Choice Scarf, Togekiss. What's really important about Inner Focus is, it's now, as we see here, immune to Intimidate. So if your opponent wants to take in like Landorus to try and like intimidate you to take a blow from Flare Blitz, it's not intimidating you, it's not lowering your attack, and Flare Blitz is going to hit super, super hard. Now with regards to old moves, we still have great physical moves. I believe it gets Sacred Fire, which I absolutely love this move. It's a 50% chance to burn, which is just crazy, and is 100% puncher power. So if you're not running like a pure offensive Flare Entei, I would recommend Sacred Fire over Flare Blitz. As well as that, it gets Extreme Speed, which is a really good priority, because it is 80 base, which is just quite nice on a team that otherwise kind of lacks priority. I believe it has things like Stone Edge, which is good for flying types. It has Iron Head, I think. Yes, it has Iron Head for the fairies in the tier. So this thing doesn't have the best move pool, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad, and I do think we could see some use for Entei, especially due to the improved Inner Focus. Now next up we do have Heatran, and new moveset wise, this thing got Scorching Sands, which, as we all know, Heatran loves to spam Lava Plume to try get burns off on the opponent, and now as well as that, it can also spam Scorching Sands to potentially get to have two moves that could potentially burn your opponent at 30%, which is going to be quite nice. On top of that, it does have Body Press, and Body Press could be really nice for taking care of like normal type walls in the tier, like Blissey or Chansey, for example, who can presumably wall out Heatran or teleport off when it tries to Toxic them, for example. And we could invest fully in like defense, for example, and suddenly we have a 311 attacking 80 base fighting move that's super effective on things like Chansey and Blissey. And let's just run like a really quick calc here, because I'm not sure what the damage is. So we're gonna Heatran blank set. Well, there's a lot of Heatran sets there. And let's just give it max defense against, we'll say, Chansey. Eviolite with Body Press. So Body Press does 28 to 33, which isn't like amazing, but that's pretty good, especially because we could trap that with like a Lava Plume. When it's trapped in a Lava Plume, it is, sorry, not Magma Storm. When it's trapped in Magma Storm, it is taking a decent bit of chip every turn, and we can just start body pressing it over and over again. It can teleport out of there, granted, but then it runs the risk of having to teleport out at quite low HP or like half HP. So that could be quite nice. Now another big thing for Heatran, which I will cover more in depth in another video about hidden abilities, Heatran's hidden ability is finally released. So we can use Flame Body Heatran, which is just going to be simply much better on a fire team, because we don't necessarily need Flash Fire. We don't really see many opponents like we won't see them Will-O-Wisping us because we're immune to burn. They won't be throwing out many fire moves. So what Flame Body does is gives them a 30% chance to burn upon contact, which is just so good. Because on top of Scorching Sands, on top of Lava Plume, your opponent has to go through so many checks if they're a physical attacker not to get burnt by Heatran just existing. Now, old moveset wise, it's always been a fantastic stealth rocker. I did mention Magma Storm, which is a good move. It has like Toxic, Will-O-Wisp, Taunt for like stall breaking. We can run Earth Power, though I personally are going to be running Scorching Sands. It's a bit weaker, but the extra burn chance is super nice. So I do see Heatran being a key member of the fire type to come back, especially because of its seal typing. It is neutral to rock, which is super good. Now next up we got Victini. Now unfortunately Victini lost its ability to be able to click Z Celebrate, because Z moves aren't back, unfortunately. I'm not even sure if Celebrate is back, but new moveset wise we have Encore, which is kind of good because Victini is decently speedy. We could like Encore them into setting up. As well as that we got Future Sight, And Future Sight is pretty good because it's going to be a 120 base stab move that until this point I don't think Psychic and Fire type could run Future Sight. And what Future Sight lets you do is kind of control the battlefield in a way that says like, hey, you can't swap into this Pokemon in this turn because you're going to be eating a Future Sight, or maybe like forces them to take in certain Pokemon at certain turns. And with that, you can like set up with your allies, you can potentially like get a KO with Victini. And finally, we do have Scorching Sands, which is just nice because it is just a powerful, sorry, not powerful, it just has the chance to burn, as I said, with the likes of Moltres and Heatron, which can be nice on the team. Now, for old movesets, we have things like Blue Flare, Bolt Strike, Dazzling Gleam, V-Create, Searing Shot. This thing has a huge variety of moves to choose from. U-Turn, Taunt, Stored Power if we have like a Calm Mind boosting set, which it can't get Calm Mind, I'm surprised. So my bad, it was Z-Celebrate. It used to use a Stored Power, so unfortunately Stored Power probably won't be great, but Wild Charge. V-Create is just insanely strong. In the Sun, it's 180 boosts, Sun boosted and Stab boosted, which is just a despicably powerful wall breaker, so I am kind of looking forward to Victini being back and seeing what people do with it. Now next up we have Volcanion, and Volcanion is so big for Fire type for one reason and one reason alone: Water Absorb. So this gives the team an effective immunity to water types unless your opponent is running something like a Mold Breaker or a Mold Breaker variant. But off the top of my head, there is no mold breaking water type that we see much in the tier, and I don't think we're going to see it just for Volcanion, for example, so that is going to be super good. And even if we did, Volcanion is still neutral to water because it's part water type, and in the Sun that's effectively resistant because the Sun will weaken the water damage. So Volcanion is going to be a super good answer to things like Vicious Rend and Greninja. Sorry, that's not bad, my bad, I mean like Surf, Kingdra sweeping. I'm playing so much Nat decks, I'm thinking Greninja is like, you know, it's everywhere. But like maybe Surf Kingdra, I would have to think twice about just clicking Surf against your team, so that's going to be super good. As well as that, it benefits hugely from the heavy duty boots. As for old movesets, we have Steam Eruption, again a great chance to burn. We have like Flamethrower, which is going to be sun boosted. We can run Sludge Bomb or Sludge Wave for things like fairies. We can run Earth Power or Earthquake for things like Toxapex. We have Defog if we want to defog away hazards. This thing's move pool is just really good. Now, I do have to warn you, if you are running Steam Eruption, it's going to be weakened due to your Sun, so do bear that in mind if you're going to run Volcanion. But I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of asset Volcanion brings to the Fire type, because I do think it's going to be much better now. And next, and last but not least, we have Blacephalon. So Blacephalon is going to be a fantastic Ultra Beast and a fantastic late game snowballer for the team. So what I mean by this is, if you leave this thing to the late game and, for example, your opponent is weakened, you could be running like a Choice Scarf Blacephalon, and this thing has quite nice speed and already fantastic special attack, and after every single beast boost it's going to get even stronger, becoming like really hard to stop. It's going to grab so much momentum so fast and just bowl your opponent down. New moveset wise, we have Endure, and I might have talked about this earlier in the video of why Endure is so important for the Ultra Beasts, because we can click Endure and activate like a Salakberry, for example. So what this lets us do is get the speed boost we would get from a Choice Scarf without having to be choice locked into one attack. So after the Endure, we can live on 1 HP, activate the Salakberry, and suddenly we can just start clicking buttons like Flamethrower, for example. If we don't want Scorching Sands, like Shadow Ball. And we have Solar Beam here, which is another move, which is going to be fantastic in the Sun for hitting ground types, for hitting rock types, for hitting water types. It's just a fantastic new move for Blacephalon to learn. And a lot of the time, fire types do run a Sun team, so that's going to be really nice for that. So after the Endure, we get the speed boost, and suddenly we can click Flamethrower, Solar Beam, or Shadow Ball, getting KOs and getting beast boosts to increase our special attack and just become a really good late game sweeper. Now, I do have to warn you, with Endure, we do have to worry about priority, because if we are on 1 HP, we will die to pretty much any priority move in the game, or chip from things like Sandstorm or status effects. So do bear that in mind if you are running a set like this. However, it's worth noting we have like Trick. If you want to trick a Choice Scarf onto something like a Toxapex, who's giving your team hassle, because that really suddenly limits what it can do. So this is just going to be a great asset for Fire to come back. We're going to pause there till we find the next game. We're going to pause there till we find our next type. We'll be right back. So next up we do have the Flying type, and I'm just going to say right now, if you're a Flying player, you're in luck because Flying got so many new good tools back. It's crazy. And this is going to be a pretty long one, so if you're not interested, the timestamps are down below and you can skip this. But let's jump right into the Flying team. So first up we have Aerodactyl. Now Aerodactyl is going to be quite good as a kind of physical revenge killer, because it is very fast at 130 base speed, which is really nice. But one of the biggest things, its new move Dragon Dance is just so big for it. So it used to have to run like Hone Claws if it wanted to boost its attack. Now it can run Dragon Dance, which lets it kind of more easily run an Adamant Nature, because your speed is going to be boosted anyway. And after like one Dragon Dance, you're hitting well over 450 attack and speed, and this just compounds to become stronger to like over 700 speed after 2 and nearly 700 attack after 2, which is going to be really, really good. It also finally got a somewhat decent flying stab in Dual Wing Beat. Dual Wing Beat, I'm not the biggest believer in it. I really wish it got like Brave Bird and like Head Smash, though that might be a bit overtuned for its ability Rockhead. But what Dual Wing Beat will let you do is kind of just break through like sturdy or sash users, especially after a +1 or 2, and it is stab, so it's going to be quite strong. And we also got Psychic Fangs, which might be nice for breaking through like Reflect and Light Screen, as well as like Aurora Veils. Old moveset wise, we still have great moves like Aqua Tail, Crunch. We can run Dragon Claw if we want, if we're struggling with Dragon types for some reason. Earthquake is always really nice to have, especially against Electric types. So after 1 or 2 Dragon Dances, this thing's going to outspeed the entire Electric type, even Alolan Raichu in its terrain. It will outspeed it, and it can just click like Earthquake and start picking up KOs. That's going to be really good. Unfortunately, Pursuit is gone. We do have Rock Slide to flinch, or Stone Edge if we want that immediate bit more power. As well as that, it can just be a good taunt to Stealth Rock lead. So I do think Aerodactyl is going to see some nice usage on a flying team. Now next up we have Articuno. So all the birds are back, and I think this is going to be pretty good. So what Articuno got is Air Slash. It already had Hurricane, I wasn't sure, but I got Air Slash if you want that slightly more reliable but immediately less powerful flying stab, as well as Weatherball, which could be nice if, for example, you might be running a rain flying team, which some people do with Pelipper, so Weatherball could be quite good. But more importantly, it has access to Stab Freeze Dry as one of its old moves, which I think is why I put Articuno here in the first place, because Freeze Dry is just so good against the water matchup, because it hits everything either super effectively or doubly super effectively, which is super, super nice. EV wise, or stat spread wise, it's very specially defensive, which pairs nicely with its like Roost, for example. It can pressure you out as well with pressure, so we could run like a specially defensive Articuno, and I'd be thinking, okay, Articuno seems pretty nice, it's very specially defensive, it has longevity with pressure, but it still dies easily to Stealth Rocks. I spoiled myself there, but heavy duty boots. Now this is going to be so big for basically every flying member on the team. It's just such a huge item to come back, and I think it might make flying a contender for a very high to top tier threat. Next up we have Zapdos, and Zapdos is going to be good because it's neutral to electric types, which is quite good. As well as that, it's quite offensive at 125 special attack and decently fast at 100 speed. It can also be run in defensive nature, like in electric. We can run a defensive Zapdos with static, for example. We can throw around discharges to try and paralyze your opponents and give your team that speed advantage. As for new moves, it finally has good Flying Stab in Hurricane and Air Slash, which is super good because until this point it really didn't have great Flying Stab, I don't think, besides like Air Cutter on the special side. And again we have Weatherball, similarly to Articuno, could be ran if we're running, for example, a Rain Dance or a Rainy Flying Team, which we can see occasionally, because with that we can run Never Missing Thunders and Never Missing Hurricanes, Weatherball that's water, and maybe like Volt Switch for an old move to grab momentum. So I do see Zapdos being quite a threatening Pokemon on the team. As well as that, obviously it does have Defog, has Roost for longevity, Tailwind for team support, just T-Wave for team support. It's going to be a great bulky supportive Pokemon in my opinion. Next up we have Moltres. Now similar to Fire, Moltres can be quite nice thanks to, again, you'll be sick of me hearing me say this by the end of flying, Heavy Duty Boots. Going to be fantastic because now it can just ignore Stealth Rock and swap in without a care in the world, assuming it's not knocked off. And if it is knocked off, it does run the chance of your opponent being burned thanks to Flame Body, for example. New moveset wise, we have Mystical Fire, which is really good for dealing with steel types. If you don't want to run like Flamethrower, if you want to run like a more bulky Moltres, you can run Mystical Fire. It is that small bit weaker immediately. However, it does lower their special attack, which can be quite nice. Or you can just go full power and go like Fire Blast, for example. Scorching Sands is also going to be quite good for taking care of like rock types who want to swap in on this, because they do run the risk of being burnt. As for longevity, we have things like Roost. We can throw around Will-O-Wisps or Toxics, for example. There's just a lot of things I do think that Moltres can do quite well, so I am looking forward to this fantastic Wall Breaker being back, thanks to its 125 special attack. Next up we have Dragonite. So Dragonite's new moves might seem strange. I have listed Fire Spin there for trapping like walls maybe and wanting to Toxic them, or you could maybe trap like Toxapex and start Earthquaking it and kind of offset the damage it can do from its recovers. Breaking Swipe can be nice for a bulky supporter Dragonite to lower your opponent's attack, which could be quite good. And we have Dual Wing Beat, which I don't see is going to be used too much because we do have a lot of better Flying Stab on this type, but it is nice for Dragonite to finally have a Flying Stab that's not just Fly. I don't like Flying Singles because you can easily swap out into like a Pokemon with Rocky Helmet or that resists, or you can click Protect and it's pretty much useless. So out of the Z Crystals, I'm not a big fan of Fly. With regards to old moves, we have the classic Outrage, just to spam a really, really powerful stab move. We have Dragon Dance to set up to become a really fast physical offensive threat. We have a myriad of moves. Like, I don't think Dragonite has any shortage of moves. We can run things like Draco Meteor, Surf, Thunder if you want to run special attacking, Blizzard. I think it might even get Ice Beam against Ice Beam, or if you're running physical, Ice Punch, Power Up Punch, Rock Slide, Superpower. Like, I could be here all day talking about how many good moves Dragonite has, so this I think is going to be huge. And most importantly, again, with Heavy Duty Boots, you can run Multiscale, which lets you swap into basically any hazard and still have your Multiscale activated, which can be good for getting a revenge kill. So that is going to be it for Dragonite, and we're not done yet. I actually have a whole second team ready for us. So next up we have Salomons, and I do think Salomons is going to be a great kind of like late game offensive snowballing Pokemon with things like Moxie. So what I mean by this is, after it scores a KO, it gets a Moxie boost, and after that Moxie boost it becomes even more threatening, kind of grabbing momentum and just really starting to power through your opponent's team. It can be quite hard to deal with. So new moveset wise, we have Dual Wing Beat. Again, as I stated before, I'm not a huge fan of Dual Wing Beat, but unfortunately it really doesn't have many good Flying Stab if you want to be running that, but it does have great Dragon Stab. We have Breaking Swipe if we want to go for a slightly more defensive Salamence. We could run like Intimidate and Breaking Swipe and lower your opponent's stage attack 2 stages, which maybe opens you up to do like a Dragon Dance, for example, in their face. And next up we have Scale Shot. So Scale Shot, I described this in Dragon, I'm going to go into detail about it again. Scale Shot is a multi-hit Dragon move that allows you to increase your attack after it hits. So what this lets us do is increase our attack thanks to Scale Shot, and if we do grab a KO on a weakened Pokemon, we will also get a Moxie boost. So what this essentially does is give us a Dragon Dance boost while also carrying an opponent. So this makes Salomons a lot more threatening for the next Pokemon to come in. It means we don't have to run like a choice locked Salomons to get this speed and attack boost. And as we see, its attack is scarily high and its speed is nothing to scoff at either. Now, it is definitely worth noting that the Scale Shot does lower your defense, so that it is something to bear in mind, that we will be weaker to things like Priority if we do the Scale Shot tech. As for all moves, as I did say, we have Dragon Dance. If you want to be a sweeper, we have things like Outrage. I think it gets Earthquake. It does Dragon Claw if you don't want to lock yourself into an Outrage. Fire Fang for dealing with those steel types, or Fire Blast if you want to invest a small bit into like special attack, for example, to break things like Ferrothorn, because its special attack is actually really good uninvested. We have Zen Headbutt if for every reason you want to run that. Stone Edge, Steel Wing, its moveset is just quite big. Now I do think this is going to be definitely a better Dragon Dancer than Dragonite, but I do think Dragonite is quite a good, more kind of bulky revenge killer, so they do serve different purposes in my opinion. And again, this can run like heavy duty boots. If you want to run the Intimidate, Break and Swipe variant, you can swap it on Stealth Rocks, Intimidate them, Break and Swipe them to lower their attack. This could be quite nice. Next up we do have Tornadus. So for Tornadus, new moveset wise, we have Nasty Plot and Weatherball. Now Nasty Plot is really good because we do have Prankster. Then you guys get that special attack boost off nice and fast to really threaten my opponent. Weatherball again can be quite good for the rain team I keep mentioning. Now I keep saying this, I'm not saying you should run a rain water flying team. I have run one before with the likes of like Pelipper and Mantine, and it can actually be quite good, so there is the option there. Now why Prankster is so good on Tornadus or on a flying team in general is we finally have Prankster Defog. We also have things like Prankster Tailwind. It can potentially run instead of Weatherball like Superpower for breaking rock types, or maybe like U-turn for grabbing momentum. We have Prankster Toxic against things like Volcarona. Prankster is a really, really good ability. Now unfortunately, we do have to worry about the fact that it doesn't hit dark types, so if we are running this, bear in mind you cannot defog against those dark types. And stat spread wise, it's quite fast as well as very offensive, having 115 and 125 respectively, so it could easily run a special attacking variant or a physical attacking variant. Next up we have Thunderous. Now Thunderous is going to be so good because it has Volt Absorb, and this is going to be even better than Zapdos for eating electric types moves, because it is completely immune outside of things like Mold Breaker. New moveset wise, unfortunately the only thing really notable is Weatherball, and I'm not really going to describe why again because I've said it so many times in the flying type. However, for old moves we can grab momentum with things like Volt Switch against Nasty Plot, which is super good. Flash Cannon can be nice for dealing with like the rock types or fairy types. Dark Pulses, just generally nice neutral coverage. Discharge if you want to spread some paralysis. So this thing does get some really good moves, so I'm looking forward to this coming back, as well as having monstrously high special attack, especially after a Nasty Plot. This thing is going to hit a lot of walls very, very hard. And again, item wise, we can run heavy duty boots if we want. We can run Life Orb if we want the immediate bit more power to our attacks. So that's going to be super good. Now, everyone most terrified Pokemon, it's back. It's Landorus. Now, I obviously couldn't cover Flying type without discussing Landorus because it's going to be huge for the team. Not only does it carry an electric immunity, it's generally just one of the most meta-defining Pokemon. And the reason for this is its move pool is fantastic on top of Intimidate. So with Endure, we could, much like the Ultra Boost, potentially run like a Salackberry Endure or maybe a Lychee Berry Endure. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this, but it could be a kind of a fun tech to run. But other than that, old moveset wise, we have things like Stealth Rock. It gets Defog, it gets U-Turn, it gets Stab Earthquake, it gets Stone Edge, it gets Rock Polish, Sword Dance. This thing can just do so much, on top of having that immunity to electric, which is super good for the flying type. It also has access to Knockoff, which is great team support. So Smackdown, if you want to hopefully like stop your opponent from levitating or flying above your earthquakes. There's just a myriad of things that Landorus can do, so I am really looking forward to it coming back. Next up is my most terrified Pokemon, and the Pokemon I probably hate fighting the most in the entire game, Celesteela. So not only is Celesteela back and going to be a monstrous threat, thanks to its fantastic typing of Steel Flying, it now has Cosmic Power. So Cosmic Power boosts your defense and special defensive stage, and this thing is already bulky. So this thing can become an even bigger wall, and after a Beast Boost can increase its higher stat even more. And you might be thinking, like, it's not the bulkiest. 103, 101 is pretty good, but not amazing. But what makes this thing really good is it gets access to things like Leech Seed. It can run a sub variant. It can just go like an all-out attacker with like max attack, max speed with like Autotomize, for example. Or does it get Rock Polish or Agility? I don't like Autotomize too much because it does unfortunately weaken your Heavy Slam, but this thing is one of the heaviest Pokemon in the game, I believe, so it can run a really powerful Heavy Slam. It can run a special variant if you want, with things like Air Slash. I think it gets Flamethrower, Energy Ball, Flash Cannon. This thing has like no shortage of good moves. So I am absolutely terrified to see what Celesteela is going to bring to the flying type, especially paired with things like the already bulky Skarmory and Corviknight. It's just a third steel flying option to add. Now, two Pokemon I haven't mentioned because I'm honestly not sure if we're going to see them in the tier or not is Landorus Incarnate, who can run like Sheer Force with Life Orb. I can just run things like Earth Power, Sludge Wave, Psychic, for example, just to become a fantastic wall breaker. And the other one, which I'm convinced may be banned, is Tornadus with Regenerator. So the reason I think this could be banned is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was recently banned in the Nat Dex because Heavy Duty Boots Regenerator is super annoying to deal with this. When it is quite fast and quite strong, it could easily run things like U-Turn. It has Stab Hurricanes. It has a fantastic moveset in general, and it can just continuously come in and in and in, regenerating all its HP back with Heavy Duty Boots. So I'm not too sure if we're going to see this in the tier, but I would be curious to see how good it would be as a defensive anchor on the flying type. So we're going to pause there till we get the next team. I'll be right back. Next up, we do have the Ghost type. Now, unfortunately, if you're a fan of the Ghost type, I think it did see its heyday towards the start of the generation, back when Knockoff wasn't as prevalent in the meta, as well as the fact we didn't have Pursuit back, so things like Dragapult really went kind of crazy. Unfortunately, they didn't get too much, but we are going to look into it and see what kind of role they may play on a mono Ghost team. So first up, we have Spiritomb. New moveset wise, we do have Hex, Poltergeist, and Lash Out. And while these moves aren't amazing, Hex could be nice if you are running like a Toxic Spike stack in Poison team. You can run that with things like Rune or Regis. So the Hex could double in power. On top of that, Spiritomb does have some decent team support, like it can run Will-O-Wisp itself, for example. And that could be really good because of its part Dark typing. It is neutral from Dark, which couldn't be quite nice against something like Urshifu, so it should be able to take a hit with its nice bulk. Has 108 defense, which is pretty good, and can potentially like wisp the Urshifu in revenge. We also have Poltergeist, which gives it some good physical Ghost Stab, though I don't really see this being used too often because the team shouldn't have a shortage of Ghost Stab. Next up, we have Lash Out, which is good Dark Stab and can be nice to like hit opponents if they want to try and set up in your face. So maybe you're fighting like, let's say, Volcarona who wants to Quiver Dance you can potentially click Lash Out, which can be quite strong. As for old moves, we can still run Foul Play, which means we don't have to invest anything into our own attack, and it is stab, so that can hit some physical attackers quite hard. As I said, it does also have some good team support in the likes of like Trick, Toxic Taunt, even Will-O-Wisp. So, and we have Infiltrator as an ability, which granted this won't do too much that I think other ghosts can't, because we do have a few ghosts with Infiltrator who also often have Trick, like Chandelure for example, so it's not going to be the most unique thing on the team. However, I could see a potential niche for it trying to counter dark types. Next up we have Blacephalon, and Blacephalon got a lot of good stuff, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of impact it's going to play on the ghost type. So, new moveset wise we have Endure, and as I said earlier with other Ultra Beasts, the Endure allows us to live on 1 HP and potentially activate like Salakberry, which is essentially the same as getting a speed boost from a Choice Scarf. However, we aren't actually locked to one attack, and as we see, Blacephalon's speed is actually very good at 344, and its special attack is monstrously high at 401, which is compounded by the fact every time it gets a KO, it gets a beast boost, making its special attack even stronger. Now you also have Encore, which is good for anti-setup on the type. Maybe if your opponent wants to throw Toxic Spikes or Stealth Rocks or something down, we can Encore them, which can force them to swap out, and with that we can either like set up a sub or maybe a Calm Mind, for example, and become a much bigger threat to the team. And of course we do have Scorching Sands, which is going to be nice for hitting like rock types, for example, like maybe Tyranitar, who could otherwise kind of wall out Blacephalon with the stab of Shadow Ball and Flamethrower. So the Scorching Sands could be nice, as well as having a good chance to spread some burn. Now, as for old movesets, we still have things like Flamethrower or Fire Blast if you want the immediate bit of power, which is going to be great for absolutely blowing through like Steel teams, for example, because this thing does get stronger after every KO. We have Psyshock or Psychic if you want some Psychic Stab. Psyshock can be nice for hitting like special walls who can otherwise wall you out, especially with like the Salakberry Endure set as I was talking about. We have Shadow Ball, which is generally just good stab. As well as that, we have things like Trick, so we can even trick a Choice Scarf onto your opponent to stop like stalls teams or walling out Blacephalon, which can be really good against things like Toxapex, maybe Amoonguss. Corviknight, they're becoming my go-to walls because those things can be quite difficult for the team to break. So we're going to pause there and we're going to look at the next type. I'll be right back. So next up we do have the Grass type, and as of late the Grass type has kind of been struggling in the meta because of things like Volcarona, who are just a massive threat. So with that, let's see if we have any new Pokemon that can hopefully maybe shift the position of Grass in the meta. So first up we have Sceptile, and new moveset wise we do have Dragon Dance, and Dragon Dance is going to be pretty good. It's just, in my opinion, one of the best boosting moves in the game. So it's going to improve Sceptile's already impressive 120 base speed and somewhat lackluster attack, but with Dragon Dance we can potentially run like an Adamant build. So after a Dragon Dance we're hitting almost 450 attack, which is starting to get pretty impressive, especially after 2 Dragon Dances. That can be quite nice. Next up we do have Grassy Glide, which in your grassy terrain is going to be priority and boosted in power, which is very good. And this is mainly because a lot of the time the grass type was want to have their grassy surge up as much as possible, thanks to things like Tapu Bulu and Rillaboom. So that could be a nice bonus. It also has Scale Shot, and while I'm not the biggest fan of Scale Shot, it could be nice against maybe the Dragon matchup in case you want to run a physical Sceptile, because I don't know if it gets any other physical Dragon moves. Actually, it's Dragon Claw. Actually, it gets Outrage. Okay, this thing gets really good Dragon moves, so I don't think Scale Shot's going to be the best unless for some reason you want the extra speed boost from it. So I would recommend Dragon Claw over that if you do want an answer to Dragon types. For an ability, it can run Unburden with things like Endure, for example. And it could run maybe a Lychee Berry or even the berry that increases your special attack stage, because with Endure you will guarantee live on 1 HP, and then suddenly you have like fantastic speed and fantastic special attack, so your speed is going to be skyrocketing well over 600, and your special attack as well is going to be quite nice, hitting like just shy of 500, I think, maybe a bit more, I'm not too sure. So that can be quite nice, especially with things like Giga Drain to get that HP back. We also have, I think, Dragon Pulse, because the type can struggle a bit with Dragon types. Focus Blast if you want to break things like Steel types. or just go all out with something like Leaf Storm. So this could be a cool set to run on Sceptile, but as for physical moves, we have, I think, like Leaf Blade, which is 90 base and high crit ratio, so after a Dragon Dance, that could hit quite hard. On top of that, you could also run like Overgrow with Endure to guarantee you get into your Overgrow range. Potentially with your Dragon Dance, making your Leaf Blades like really powerful because they will be 1.5 times boosted from Overgrow, as well as 1.5 times boosted from your Stab, and potentially 1.3 times boosted from your Grassy Surge as well. So this thing could hit just really, really hard. Now next up we do have Cradily, and I think Cradily has always been good on the Grass type, mainly because it is Rock type, and Rock type pairs quite nicely with Grass. So what the Rock type lets it do is be able to potentially tank things like Flying, Fire, as well as be able to hit back physically against those two types, as well as Bug and Ice. So there are things, and Poison actually, resist Poison as well, so Cradily is good defensively and offensively on a Grass team. Now unfortunately it doesn't resist Bug, because what always shocks me is Rock doesn't resist Bug, and therefore we're still going to be having trouble with things like Volcarona. As for new moveset, I got a Grassy Glide, which I don't see being too huge of a deal on the Grass type because its offensive presence isn't that fantastic. I think we're going to want to see maybe a specially defensive Cradily, for example, to try and live against special attackers like fire types, and with this it gets good support in like Stealth Rock, for example. I think it gets Toxic, Recover for longevity, as well as that we can just run a Rock Stab, which unfortunately we don't get good special Rock Stab unless you want to run Ancient Power and try risk the boost. But the Ancient Power could be nice against something like Charizard because we should be living a hit, or like Volcarona, though they can boost up with Quiver Dance, so you do have to be wary of that. So I definitely do see some use for Cradily, and you could potentially run Storm Drain if you don't want to be hit by water attacks because it is neutral down to part rock, or if you want to not be forced out by things like Dragon Tail, Roar, Whirlwind, you can run Suction Cups, which could be nice as well. So next up, we do have Tapu Bulu, and I think Tapu Bulu is going to be fantastic. I forgot to put its new moves on this, so I'm going to put them here now because I do remember what they are. We have High Horsepower, Play Rough, Close Combat, and Grassy Glide. So I do think Tapu Bulu is going to be insane on a Grass team. Do I think it's going to replace Rillaboom? Possibly. Do I think it'll be used in tandem with Rillaboom? Yes, absolutely I do. I think having a second Grassy Surge user, especially with Grassy Glide, is going to be fantastic for the type, giving your type passive recovery, as well as just boosting your stab across the board. As for new movesets, Play Rough is going to be fantastic against Dragon types. As I said earlier with Sceptile, I think the Grass type does struggle with fighting dragons, so having an immunity to dragon as well as a stab answer to dragon in Play Rough is going to be fantastic for the team. Next up we do have High Horsepower, and High Horsepower is nice over Earthquake because it is not weakened by your own Grassy Surge, so I'm glad I got that over Earthquake. And what it can run with High Horsepower is it can be nice to deal with Steel types. Again, Steel types can give the team trouble because they wall out their Grass Stab, so that can be quite nice. And speaking of destroying Steel types, we have Close Combat. And the reason I like Close Combat over Superpower is because Superpower lowers your physical attack, your attack stat, whilst Close Combat doesn't, making it somewhat more spammable, so you can just kind of click this against Steel teams and not have to worry about swapping out to reset your attack lowering. And finally we have Grassy Glide, which is going to be just great stab. We see how much damage Rillaboom can do against so many types of Grassy Glide, and Tapu Bulu is that immediate bit more powerful with 130 base attack over the 125 Rillaboom has. So I do think Tapu Bulu is going to be a fantastic asset for the type, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what damage it can do in tandem with Rillaboom. So that is going to be it for Grass type. We're going to pause till we get to the next one. I'll be right back. So next up we have a type I've always really enjoyed in concept. It is Ground. Now unfortunately I think Ground struggled a bit in the meta at the moment because things like water are so prevalent, as well as while Grass isn't prevalent, it is such a hard matchup for Ground to deal with. With that said, let's look at the new tools it got and discuss them. So first up, the King is back. We have Nidoking, and Nidoking has always been, for me, a cornerstone of a ground team because it's such a good special wall breaker. You might be looking at this and thinking, oh, its special attack is quite low, especially compared to its physical attack. And if you're not familiar with Nidoking, you mightn't understand how good it is. So let me show you. So you like to run max special attack. Sometimes adamant, sometimes you want to run a plus speed nature. Sorry, sometimes modest, sometimes you want to run timid. That is up to you depending on what you want to outspeed. Now its 295 special attack isn't looking amazing at the moment, but that's not where it shines. It gets sheer force, and this can be paired with Life Orb. So what sheer force, and sorry, not Love Ball, Life Orb. As much as I do like Nidoking, let's give him a Life Orb. So what Sheer Force Life Orb lets you do is ignore the recoil you get from Life Orb, assuming your Sheer Force activates. So what this means is if your attack has a secondary effect, it's boosted by 1.3 times from Sheer Force and a further 1.3 times from your Life Orb, and you don't take recoil. So that's going to be insanely good because of Nidoking's ridiculous move pool. So let's see, we get like Fire Blast, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, you get Sludge Wave, you can get like Earth Power if you want some Ground Stab. We're going to put Sludge Wave. So what this lets us do, unfortunately it didn't get many good new moves, but what this moveset lets us do is just absolutely blow through steel walls in things like Fire Blast. And I know Ground doesn't struggle with steel, but there's the likes of Skarmory, Air Balloon, there is Celesteela, there's Corviknight, and none of that will matter when Nidoking absolutely blows through them, as well as something like Ferrothorn. We have Thunderbolt for the flying matchup because flying can be quite annoying because of obviously they do ignore our stab, they ignore our ground stab because they are immune. We similarly have Ice Beam for the ground with the flying matchup against things that can eat Thunderbolts, like maybe like a Landorus for example. So we could potentially click Ice Beam on a swap in and just pick up a KO. Ice in general is just one of the best offensive types in the game, hitting so many things for 4x effective like Landorus, Garchomp. Gliscor's not back, so that's not relevant, but a lot of dragons like Dragonite, who's going to be a big threat in the tier again. So Ice Beam is going to be fantastic for that in my opinion. And next up we have Sludge Wave. So Sludge Wave is going to be insanely strong because this is 1.3 times from Sheer Force, a further 1.3 times from Life Orb, and a further 1.5 by from Stab. So Sludge Wave is going to hit like a truck. We choose Sludge Wave over Sludge Bomb because Sludge Bomb doesn't offer anything Sludge Wave doesn't, because we cannot poison thanks to Sheer Force, so we want the immediate bit more power, as well as that it does bypass Bulletproof. So Sludge Wave is going to be fantastic for destroying like grass types, which obviously give these type a lot of struggle. So I am looking forward to seeing what Nidoking does as the premier wall breaker, a special wall breaker on something like the ground type. Next up we do have Nidoqueen, and I don't think Nidoqueen is going to be as prevalent as Nidoking because it is definitely less offensive than her male counterpart, but she is more defensive. And that defensive could be nice if you want to run, for example, Body Press, because we don't have to invest anything in attack. We can go like a max defense, max HP nature, for example, and our Body Press is going to be hitting quite nice with 300 base. As well as that, for old moves we do have things like Toxic Spikes. We can run Dragon Tail to force your opponent out to phase them. We can run like Stealth Rock. It can generally just be quite a good team support. As for an ability, you can also run Sheer Force if you are running any secondary moves and you want that like bit of damage. Or you can run Poison Point because the opponent has a 30% chance of being poisoned if they make contact with you. This can be good for punishing U-turn. It's already immune to Volt Switch because it's ground type, so it can be good with like maybe Rocky Helmet as a good punishment for trying to pivot with U-turn because they take Rocky Helmet chip. And there's a 30% chance they will be poisoned from your poison point, so that could be interesting, though I do think Nidoking is a little better. So Garchomp is back, and Garchomp has always been one of the most threatening ground types in the tier, so I'm very excited to see it back. New moveset wise, it didn't get too much of note. You could run Breaking Swipe if for some reason you want a more defensive Garchomp that wants to lower your opponent's attack to try and hopefully either set up with your Garchomp or other your allies. Though Scale Shot could be pretty big because it is the first time Garchomp can reliably increase its speed. It never got Dragon Dance, and it still didn't, which is maybe a good thing because I do think it would be banned if this monster got Dragon Dance thanks to its amazing attack stat and fantastic speed, as well as great access to stab in Earthquake. So I think that may be too much for the tier, but I don't know. But what Scale Shot lets you do is like Swords Dance up, and say we're running a max speed Jolly Nature. It lets you Swords Dance up, surpassing way beyond like 700, and then a Scale Shot is Stab, which can pick up KOs because it is a multi-hit move, ignoring things like Sturdy and Sash, for example, while also allowing you to increase your speed. So Garchomp can become a threatening monster. As well as that, for old moves, you still have things like Outrage if you want to just tear through things with overwhelming stab. Of course, we have Earthquake. It can be a great Stealth Rock lead. Garchomp is fantastic because it can also run things like Fire Blast because its special attack isn't that terrible, especially uninvested. It's not the best, but the Fire Blast will be threatening things like Ferrothorn, which can give the team a bit of hassle. So I am looking forward to Garchomp. It has Rough Skin, which we can pair with like Rocky Helm to do tons of damage, punishing physical attackers. Or if you want to be crazy and you're running like a Sand team, you could try Sandveil just to try and increase your evasion a small bit to hopefully live some clutch attacks. Now finally we do have Landorus, and Landorus is going to be pretty big for the team because Landorus in general is just a great Pokemon. With Intimidate, it's going to be good for swapping in on physical threats and lowering their attack with Intimidate. New moveset wise, we only notably got Endure, which I don't see is going to be used too often, as I said in Flying, but maybe for some like gimmicky Salakberry or maybe like Lychee Berry Landoruses, we could possibly see it. Now what I do think Landorus is great at doing is it has access to Rock Polish and Swords Dance, and after like an Intimidate it can potentially get a Rock Polish off if your opponent wants to swap out, and suddenly it's quite hard to outspeed this thing, and its attack is monstrously high at 427, which can be further boosted by a Swords Dance. Then we could run things like Earthquake, and fortunately we do not have any good Flying Stab unless you want to run Fly for some reason, but I'm not a big fan of Fly in singles because of things like Protect and being able to swap out and Scout. But we can also run maybe like, Smackdown. So we can smack down basically all your opponents, even if they're Flying type, and then threaten them with Earthquake. Now unfortunately things like Z Crystals are gone, so we can't run Z Fly, which would be nice against grass types, but I still definitely see Landorus having a role in the tier. And what's super important for the ground type, and especially something like Garchomp and Landorus, Hidden Power is no longer in the game, so we won't be able to run Hidden Power Ice as a counter to Landorus, so we'll have to see much more native ice attacks, I think, if they want to deal with things like Landorus. So that is going to be it for ground type. I do think we got some good tools. I'm looking forward to seeing if it's better now in the new meta. And we're going to pause till we look at the next type. I'll be right back. So next up we have a type that's been doing crazy stuff this generation. It's Mono Ice. So when I would say Mono Ice is a good type, I would not believe myself years ago. But at the start of the generation, when things like Kyurem were around, this thing was a monstrous type. Now unfortunately it has slightly fallen out of favour in the meta, through no real fault of its own. The ban of Kyurem I don't think helped, but I do think it was healthy for the meta overall. Kyurem Black is what I'm referring to, by the way. I do think it was a healthy ban, but the type is certainly still usable in the right hands, and let's see what new tools it got and what it's going to be doing now in the meta. So first up we got Articuno, and Articuno's only really notable new move in my opinion is Air Slash, but the Air Slash is going to be quite nice because it's some reliable Flying Stab. Now it did have Hurricane, but Hurricane is quite unreliable. So this could be quite good, especially against like the fighting matchup, because its Flying type does give it neutrality and the Air Slash can hit back quite hard. This thing is nice and bulky with 125 special defense and 100 defense and 90 HP, so it's not bad. We could run Pressure or potentially Snow Cloak if we are running a Hail team to try and get you those clutch dodges against things like Focus Blast especially. It'd be very nice to counter like special attacking fighting types, which obviously the team hates dealing with. So this could be quite nice. As well as that, we have like Roost for longevity, we have Freeze Dry to hit like those pesky water types in the tier, we have Toxic, I think it gets U-Turn to grab momentum. It has Aurora Veil if you do want a second Veiler on your team, for example. Tailwind to give your team some speed, Whirlwind to phase out your opponent. I do think this Pokemon is going to be quite good, and this is compounded by the fact it gets heavy duty boots, which is really good because now it doesn't have to worry about swapping in on hazards and taking tons of damage. On that note, it also gets Defog itself. So I do definitely see this Pokemon have some use on the type, and I am looking forward to trying it out myself. As I said, especially against like the fighting matchup. Next up we do have Walrein, and Walrein is a bit of a strange one, because you might think Walrein, in theory, maybe should have been good on a mono ice team, but never has been, and you'd be right in saying that. Well, I wouldn't actually, that's a bit harsh. I don't think Walrein's never been good on an ice team. I think Walrein is hard to get working on an ice team. But now it has fantastic new moves. It has Icicle Spear as a good multi-hitting stab move. It has Heavy Slam, and I'm not 100% sure, I haven't checked it, but this thing is pretty blubbery, so I imagine the thing is quite heavy. So that could be nice for dealing with things like Fairy types, or rock types, for example. We do have Hydro Pump, which is finally, it got like a good water stab, because until now it's had things like Surf, which is pretty good, but Hydro Pump is that immediate bit stronger, which can be quite nice. It is a bit more unreliable, so do bear that in mind. And we got Body Press, which again can be quite nice if you want to run a physically defensive Walrein. HP wise, this thing has loads of HP, with 110 being quite bulky, as well as reasonable defenses in 90-90 and pretty good special attack in 95. However, old moveset wise, we could run things like Curse, if you want to run a Curse Body Press set, for example, alongside like Icicle Spear, and I think it gets some good physical water moves. It gets Waterfall. I don't think it gets Liquidation, unfortunately, but Waterfall is quite nice. Unless you want Aqua Tail, but I would not recommend that as it is a bit more unreliable. Other than that, we do have some nice special moves, like we have some Ice Stab in Ice Beam and Blizzard. What else can we run? Signal Beam isn't great, okay. I might have lied to you, it doesn't have very good special attacks. That is my bad, but it does have some good status moves. So let's look at our category. Status moves. We have Encore, we have Yawn, we have Toxic. We could run like a Sleep, Talk, Rest build, for example. Roar for phasing. So this thing does have some pretty good status moves, in my opinion. And where the thing really shines on an ice team is Thick Fat. So its damage from fire and ice moves are halved against this Pokemon. And this thing is Ice Water, so it's already taken neutral damage from fire attacks. So this effectively resists fire moves. If you want to go back and look at my early video about building a Monotype team, I talked about how effective resistances and immunities are so rare on a Monotype team, but so coveted. So it is really nice to be able to have that. And I do have a quick calc up here. Sorry, that's my my Reggie Ice, which I'll talk about in a second. So let's see, we're running a max special defense, maybe max HP Walrein, with maybe like, let's say Curse, for example. So our nature is going to be up special defense and down attack, or sorry, down special attack, which I don't see right here. Careful. So we're being like a careful nature. Now, behind an Aurora Veil, which we should be having because it is an ice team, so we're assuming our Aurora Veil is up here. Against a Choice Specs Charizard that's boosted by solar power in the sun, Flamethrower and Weatherball, it just shrugs us off. It does nothing. 20 to 23 and 22 to 26. And that is assuming sun is up. Now say we have our Hail up instead. This is doing an absolutely measly 8.9 to 10.6%. That is honestly pretty embarrassing for Charizard to do that little damage. Now this is bearing in mind assuming we have Hail and our Aurora Veil up, which is not too unlikely in an ice matchup. But this is Choice Specs Charizard. That thing hits hard. Now let's say we're running a Curse Body Press build and we're at +1 Waterfall. Let's see how much damage this does at +1. With no investment, it does 88 to 105. So after Stealth Rock, that's a guaranteed one-hit KO. Even without Stealth Rock, it is a potential 25% two-hit KO. Now, let's run 4 EVs here. it boosts up to 31.3% from 25%, which is really good. So I definitely think Walrein is going to be super fun against the fire matchup. And as well as that, I forgot to mention Body Press is going to be really good against steel types, because if you curse up, for example, and you have more defense even after a +1, let's see how much your defense goes to. It doesn't say here, but after 324 defense, which is pretty good for a body press after 1, because with that and your amazing HP, you will be definitely eating some physical attacks as well. So I'm looking forward to using Walrein. And finally, we have Reggie Ice. I don't think Reggie Ice got too much in the new move department, unfortunately, but I did want to mention Reggie Ice quickly because its special defense is hilarious. It is so high. And what this lets us do is, especially behind something like Aurora Veil, live some crazy special attacks we realistically shouldn't be living. And let's see, for example, we're going to run a Modest Nature, which is special attack is decently high. We can run things like Thunder Wave, Thunderbolt for enemies like Charizard if you really want to, or the Steel Flying types in the tier. We have a second Aurora Veiler if we need that. Flash Cannon for dealing with like fairies or rock types. We can run Toxic if we want some more support. Ancient Power to do with fire types if we really want to. Ice Beam again just for some nice stab, for example. So while its stats aren't that, special attack isn't that impressive, its special defense, as I said, is just ludicrous. And we can also have passive recovery thanks to Ice Body and the Hail, and we can run heavy duty boots, allowing us to continuously swap in on hazards. So let's just run a quick calc here with Reggie Ice. With max special defense, Charizard in the Sun, it does live a guaranteed Weather Ball, which is kind of crazy with Aurora Veil up, and we can like Thunder Wave it back or potentially Thunderbolt it back for a lot of damage. Now it's definitely not going to be your best option for dealing with what nature do I want? Modest. So the 68 to 81, it's not going to be your best for dealing with things like fire types, but maybe on attacks that hit you neutrally. So I'm just going to try to think of a special attacker off the top of my head. I'm going to say Hydreigon, because Hydreigon does hit quite strong. So let's say it's a +1 Hydreigon with specs. The Draco Meteor is 31 to 37, and our Ice Beam is almost a guaranteed KO. It's a guaranteed KO after Stealth Rocks, which is pretty good. Though we honestly won't have struggle with dragons. Just an example, maybe let's look up an electric type like a Alolan Raichu. Or Alakazam is the first thing that came up here, so let's look up Alakazam. It's expanding, its Focus Blasts only do 27 to 32, which honestly is not that much, and it is guaranteed to get KO'd by something like Ice Beam, so it can just be a great special wall in the team. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they can do with that. Alternatively, if you don't want to run heavy duty boots, if you're confident you can get rid of hazards on the team, you can run like a weakness policy, because the thing will easily eat up a special attack like a Focus Blast or a Flamethrower, for example, and get 2 stages of special attack, hitting almost 660 special attack, which is going to be quite strong. So maybe not the best Pokemon, but I am looking forward to seeing what some people can pull off at Reggie Ice, and I definitely want to be experimenting with it myself. So we're going to pause there till we look at the next type. I'll be right back. So next up we do have Normal type, and I'm sorry to say that Normal type unfortunately doesn't seem like it's gotten much in the DLC with this, so I can't see it being too impactful to the meta, but we're going to dive into it either way. So first up we have Regigigas, and your first impression of Regigigas might be like, this thing's BST is monstrous, like look at those stats, they're so high. And you'd be right in thinking that. Unfortunately, it has unequivocally the worst ability in the game, bar none in my opinion, Slow Start. So what Slow Start lets you do? On switching, this Pokemon's attack and speed are halved for 5 turns. So this thing is essentially running with half HP, half attack and half speed for 5 turns. And 5 turns is a long time. This isn't 5 turns in the match, so maybe after turn 6 where Regigigas is good. It has to be on the field for 5 turns in a row, and that counter does reset when it swaps out. So unfortunately, I do not see Regigigas being used at all, but I thought I'd discuss it because there might be some mad person out there who decides, I'm going to make Regigigas viable. And I hope it does. I like Regigigas. So in the new move department, it finally got Protect, which is going to go a long way to stalling out turns to hopefully get Slow Start activated. However, the problem with this is it's very one trick and it's very obvious the Regigigas is going to protect every second turn, because it's not much it can do otherwise. It got Rest as well, which can be interesting because until now it didn't have any reliable way of recovering its own HP. It also got Body Press, and Body Press can be okay because our defense isn't halved for 5 turns, so I guess if you really want to use Regigigas, you could come in and start body pressing things for the first 5 turns until your like attack and speed isn't halved anymore, for example. Again, I don't recommend this, but maybe it's something people want to do, like run a Curse Regigigas. I don't think it gets Iron Defense. No, it doesn't. It gets Cursed though. It doesn't get Cursed, my bad. So it doesn't even get that. I don't know if it has any reliable way of boosting its defense. It doesn't really seem to, no. So unfortunately, I guess we can body press and maybe hope to do some damage that way. But again, it is a bit of a gimmick considering you can't actually raise your defensive stage at all. Or not reliably anyway. So while I don't recommend Regigigas, I thought I'd mention it because there is probably someone out there watching this thinking, yeah, I'm going to make Regigigas work. And if you do, please send me a video, a clip of it, or send me the team. I'd like to try and do it myself. And I'm going to try myself, but I don't see it happening. Next up, we do have Audino. And unfortunately, Audino is going to be its regular form, not its Mega. I do think its Mega would play a much bigger impact on the type, granting it a neutrality to fighting because it is Fairy type. That said, Audino does have Regenerator, which is always a good ability to have, and until now I don't think Normal had any Regenerator mons, so it could be good as a defensive core alongside things like Blissey, Chansey, Porygon 2, things like that. New moveset wise, we do have Body Slam, which isn't amazing, but it does have a 30% chance to paralyze, which can be okay if you really want to run that, though if you want paralysis I would just recommend running Thunder Wave. Otherwise, we have Heal Bell, Healing Wish, we have Regular Wish. It does have some good clerical support on the team if you do need that, though I don't think Normal really lacks that kind of support. Does it get Stealth Rock? It doesn't, unfortunately. But it definitely does have maybe a small niche if you want like a regen core, Wish Passer or Heal Beller, for example. It also gets Trick Room if for some reason you are running a Trick Room normal team, so I don't think the thing is going to be amazing. I don't think either of these Pokemon are going to be amazing new like meta-defining Pokemon on the normal type, but someone out there might find some usage with them, so I thought I'd cover them nonetheless. Now we're going to pause there till we find the next type. I'll be right back. So next up we have Poison, which is my favorite type in the game, so I'm super excited to be covering this, and I'm happy to see what kind of new tools we got. So let's jump right into the type. So first off we have Nidoking, and much like Ground, it didn't get too much in the move department, though I did list Hex here while I didn't list it in the Ground type. And you might be wondering why I didn't list it in Ground, is because I think Hex has a much bigger role on the Poison team than it does on a Ground team. Not only does this allow us to hit Ghost type super effectively and Psychic type super effectively, 2 types which is really nice to be able to hit with a Poison type, it can potentially be doubled in power because the Poison type very often likes to run Toxic Spikes. So with these Toxic Spikes we're hopefully passing statuses around the team, and in general Poison just likes to try and status their opponent as much as possible, be it Paralysis, Burns, Poisons, all that kind of good stuff, even Sleep with Spore. So the Poison type does like spreading paralysis status effects around, which will double Nidoking's Hex damage. Now on top of that, what Poison type has been really missing until now is a good wall breaker, and all its prayers are answered with Nidoking. So Nidoking is going to be insanely good with 295 special attack, which doesn't look the best, but as I said earlier, Life Orb is 1.3 times boosting, as well as Sheer Force being 1.3 times boosting to any attacks that have a secondary effect. So we could be running Fire Blast for things like Ferrothorn or other steel types that give us hostile. We can run Ice Beam for dragons and flying types. We can run like Thunderbolt for water types, or flying types again. We can run Earth Power for other poison types, for like Toxapex for steel types. For so much in the tier, Earth Power is really, really good. And this is Stab boosted, as well as Sheer Force and Life Orb boosted. And if we want some more Poison Stab on the team, we have Sludge Wave. And I say Sludge Wave over Sludge Bomb because Sludge Bomb is 30% chance to power up poison, while Sludge Wave is a less chance to poison, but is stronger, and thanks to Sheer Force, we can't poison anyway, so it's always important to opt for the stronger option of Sludge Wave, as well as it's not being blocked by things like Bulletproof. Sorry, my bad. I couldn't think of it. And finally, we finally have a good Stealth Rocker on the Poison type with Nidoking, so I do think the King is back, and it is what Poison was looking for a long time. A good, nice wall breaker. Next up we have Nidoqueen. Now Nidoqueen is definitely not as strong as Nidoking, she's the more defensive one of the two. That's not to say she's going to be bad, because I do think it has some usage. It can be a good Stealth Rock setter with a healthy defensive backbone and things like Toxapex and Amoonguss, and even Slowbro as your triple regen core. It can swap around easily enough. It has Toxic Spikes as well, if your team doesn't need Toxic Spikes. It can run Poison Point if you are running like a Rocky Helmet, for example, to punish physical attackers like U-turners, and she can't be Volt switched on because she is Ground type, which is quite nice. As well as that, we have Body Press, which can be paired nice with our defense build if you want to run a defensive Nidoqueen, as well as Hex, which is similar to Nidoking in the idea that we can Hex opposing Pokemon who have been statused. So next up we have Crobat, and Crobat is going to be the first proper ground resist that Poison has this generation, because Air Balloon and Levitate does exist and they are quite good, but they can be worked around with things like Mold Breaker or just popping the balloon. So because Crobat is Flying type, it cannot be hit with like things like Earthquake, High Horsepower, Earth Power, all those kind of stuff that would ordinarily hit your team super effectively. New moveset wise, we have Crunch, which can be good because it is some nice dark damage against the Psychic type, which can give us a bit of hassle. We have Hex, which much like Nidoking and Nidoqueen is good if you're trying to spread status on the opponent, and while its special attack stat isn't the best at 70, it does have access to Nasty Plot, which can be good. So let's say we're running a max speed Timid Nature. Its special attack isn't great, but after a Nasty Plot, it can hit decently hard. As well as that, it now has access to Hurricane, which is really good for hitting things with a Stab 110 base move. It did get Air Slash, but Hurricane is that good bit stronger. And with Crobat's somewhat low special attack, I think you want that immediate bit of power. Ability-wise, we have Infiltrator, which can be quite good for breaking through subs, so we can like taunt through subs, we can toxic through subs. This is all really good stuff for things like Volcarona, and if you really want to run the Golbat, we can run like a specially defensive Golbat with Eviolite, for example. And the reason I say this is with Infiltrator, it should be able to live hits from stuff like Volcarona nicely, and can Toxic behind its sub and slowly whittle them down. It also gets Roost and Defog for longevity and team support. Now Crobat also gets Roost and Defog, as well as being able to nicely run the Heavy Duty Boots item if you so choose to have a fast Defogger on the team. Last but not least, we have Nihilego. So Nihilego is going to be quite a good asset to the team. It is fast, having nice special attack and speed, being a good late game sweeper. Now this looks like a very specific kind of build right here. I'm going to show you why I ran this. So we're going to look up Nihilego with a blank set to begin with. And we want to run 176 and 80 HP. So if I recall why I did this, we're going to look up Volcarona, and we're going to use an offensive Quiver Dancer. Oh, I have Veil up, so I shouldn't have Veil up. I was wondering why they did so little damage. So with a Timid +2 Psychic, we are guaranteed to survive, which is really good. And a +1, which we're probably swapping into, again, we're guaranteed to survive, and we can run something like Meteor Beam here. And Meteor Beam will absolutely destroy it, like one hit KO without a shadow of a doubt. even at +1 special defense. At +2 special defense, it's still when it KOs, which is really good, and it scores a KO. With Power Herb, we can charge our Meteor Beam instantly, and it will KO the opponent. Now what this lets us do is get 2 stages of special attack instead of 1, because the KO will get us a stage thanks to Beast Boost, and Meteor Beam in general increases your special attack, putting Nihiligo's special attack almost to the 700 mark, which is really good. Now that is just one example of what you can run if you really want to. We can also run the tried and true Choice Scarf user with things like Power Gem. So Power Gem can absolutely tear through like flying teams, fire teams, bug teams, all that kind of stuff. Tears through them, especially late game. And Poison is really good for like slowly chipping your opponent away and wearing them down with its like Regen Core, Toxic Spikes, its new Stealth Rocks. And you can come in late game and just start scoring KOs and picking up special attack boosts, and its speed is quite nice, so it will be quite fast as well. It also has Hex for, much similar to the Crobat, Nidoqueen, Queen and Nidoking. Hex is nice for dealing really good damage to Psychic types if they are statist. As for old movesets, we have Thunderbolt for flying types, we have Sludge Wave for a secondary stab, we have Dazzling Gleam for tearing through like dragon types. Just generally, I think Nihiligo is one of the best offensive threats Poison has, especially because it is quite fast. So I am really looking forward to using that, and we're going to pause there till we look at the next type. I will be right back. So next up we have Psychic type, and Psychic type is a pretty good type in theory. I think it has some really good tools at its disposal, but unfortunately with the rise in popularity of things like Urshifu, Single Strike and Volcarona, the type did kind of struggle to hold its own against certain matchups. So let's look at the new tools it got and see what effect I think they'll play on the type. So first off, we have Metagross back, and Metagross has always been a pretty good Pokemon. It is a pseudo-legendary, so it does have a nice 600 base stat total, and on top of that it has fantastic attack and defense, clocking in at 135 and 130 respectively, which is extremely physically bulky and physically strong for a Psychic type, who tend to prefer the special side of the stat spectrum. So I do think there's going to be some use for Metagross. Its Steel typing is also pretty good. Now unfortunately, as of Generation 6, Steel no longer resists Ghost and Dark, so that would have been fantastic if it still did. But we do have a neutrality to Bug, which is always quite nice, as well as a plethora of other resistances. So new moveset wise, we have Cosmic Power, which could be interesting if you want to run a more defensive Metagross. This does increase your defense and special defense stage, but I typically would prefer like a more physically offensive Metagross, but it's definitely worth noting because I do think there is some use it can get. Next up we do have Steel Roller, and this is an interesting one. It's going to be a very powerful steel move. I think off the top of my head it's either 120 or 130 base, don't quote me on that. Steel move, which is going to be Stab, and it removes the terrain from the field. Now this is kind of a double-edged sword for Psychic. It's really good against things like Electric, Fairy, Water, Grass, all those kind of types for removing their own terrain. However, Psychic also likes using terrain with the likes of Indeedee using Psychic terrain, so you do run the risk of removing that as well. Or maybe you use that Psychic terrain in your favor and you have Steel Roller as a very powerful steel move that also removes your terrain, opening up things like Bullet Punch because your Psychic terrain would otherwise block priority. So I do see there could be some use for Steel Roller and Metagross. As for old moveset, it does get Earthquake, which is really good just for great coverage. We have Explosion to keep up momentum by booming in your opponent's face. We have some nice fighting moves like Hammer Arm or Ice Punch for dealing with the likes of dragons in the tier. We also have Power Up Punch if you want a slightly weaker Metagross that can boost its power, for example. We have Meteor Mash for that as well. It's not as reliable because it is 90% accurate with a 20% chance, but that 20% chance can really change the tide of battle, especially if you're not completely relying on it. Now, really importantly, we have Rock Slide, and why Rock Slide is pretty important is because I do think we could see a bulkier Metagross who could be used to counter something like Volcarona. So I'm going to run a quick calc here because I'm not actually sure if this will work. But if it does, it could be pretty good. So let's look up Volcarona. So we're going to use an offensive Quiver Dancer, and we'll say it's at +1. So obviously Flamethrower is going to one-hit KO. It does survive Bug Buzz, but we're going to max out our HP stat here and give it the berry that reduces fire attacks, which I cannot remember what it's called, so I'm going to look it up here. Half damage from fighting dark. I should have had this checked out before I went in to find it. I definitely passed it out somewhere. Ah, Occaberry. Actually, I knew that. I run it on my Jirachi all the time. Don't know why I had to look it up. So if we run it like Occaberry, for example, we will guaranteed live a Flamethrower from a +1 Volcarona, which is pretty important because Volcarona is a massive threat. We also guarantee live the Bug Buzz, and with, we'll say, max attack and Rock Slide, that's going to be obviously a guaranteed KO on Volcarona, which is pretty good. Even if it is, let's see if it's a max defense Volcarona, it's still a guaranteed KO without the need for an adamant nature. So that could be pretty interesting, and then you can nicely heal up that Metagross in the future with your plethora of healing Wish Pokemon that Psychic, or even Wish Pokemon that Psychic has access to. So next up we have Latias and Latios, and I'm going to be covering these pretty much in tandem like I did in Dragon, because they are very similar and they got the same new moves. So new moveset wise, we've got Mystical Fire on both of them, which is fantastic. So Mystical Fire is going to be really good against attacking like Steel types, for example, which the team can struggle with as well a bit. What's really good about Mystical Fire over something like Hidden Power Fire, because Hidden Power Fire obviously is not back in this generation, Mystical Fire has the added bonus of lowering your opponent's special attack, which does give your Pokemon more longevity, which is quite nice. Next up we have Aura Sphere, and Aura Sphere is going to be great because until now I don't think they actually had any fighting coverage. They had Hidden Power Fighting, so now they have a proper fighting coverage, which is going to be fantastic against things like Dark types, Steel types, Normal types, just a lot of types in the tier in the meta. Because fighting is just such a good offensive type, and especially I think paired with Psychic types. So you could catch like Bisharp on the swap, for example. You could Aura Sphere in the face of a Hydreigon. Now their speed tier is actually really good with 110. So this hits 350 speed, which is really, really good. If you want a slightly more defensive variant, you go for Latias, or if you want a slightly more offensive variant, you go for Latios. I personally prefer Latios. I just like that immediate bit more power. But with a speed tier like this, we could run, for example, Calm Mind. We could run Roost or Recover. Probably Recover actually, because we don't want to lose our Levitate, for example. Then we could run Aura Sphere, so you could like potentially Calm Mind in the face of a Hydreigon. So with the +1 special defense, we should easily live a Dark Pulse and hopefully be able to win a KO back with things like Aura Sphere. So let's look it up quickly there. So that's a Mega, sorry. We're going to blank set with max speed, Timid Nature against Hydreigon. We'll say Nasty Plot. So Draco is very strong, but after a +1, we do need some investment into like HP, for example. Okay, so it's not going to be as clean as I was hoping. Maybe if we run a max special defense nature, we can almost guarantee live the Draco Meteor, but it is unfortunately a 25% chance. That is with Life Orb. So say we're running just leftovers, or yeah, it's same thing. We do guarantee live the Draco Meteor. Now at +1, we'll have to see does a Aura Sphere at 1-hit KO. It does not, but our Dragon Pulse should. So we could run like the +1, for example. We guarantee live the Draco Meteor. Even after a Draco Meteor, we could Calm Mind again their face because they will be weakened at -2. they are doing a lot less damage. They're doing 33 to 40, which means you can easily like roost up or calm mind again. So it could be good for like fighting dark teams, for example. Other than that, it does have some other good moves like Healing Wish if you want the support. It has access to nice coverage in Ice Beam, Psyshock if you want to hit your special defensive walls. We have Shadow Ball for hitting ghost types, for example, or opposing psychic types. Thunderbolt, T-Wave, Toxic, Trick, all good. Team Support, Wish. So, and I think it has Defog as well, which is super important. So, I do think the Latis are definitely going to see some use. I would recommend Latias if you want the slightly more defensive variant, or Latios if you want the slightly more offensive variant. Next up, we have Victini. So, Victini got some nice new moves. With Encore, we can just like Encore setup and force them into setting up, which can be quite nice because Victini does have a plethora of powerful moves. Like V-Create, for example, is 180 base stab, which is just insanely powerful. Now, unfortunately, it does have the drawback of lowering your defense, special defense, and speed, but you could Encore a wall, for example, and force it to swap out, and maybe like V-Create what's coming in. Alternatively, we have Scorching Sands if you want to run a more specially Victini, because it is 100 across the board like a lot of mythic Pokemon. So we can run Scorching Sands and potentially burn Pokemon. We hit Steel type super effectively and like Rock type super effectively. Plenty of type super effectively because Ground is a fantastic coverage move. And finally, we have Expanding Force if we are running a Psychic Terrain team. We have Expanding Force, which can be quite nice because this doubles in power as well as being boosted by the terrain effect itself, being quite powerful. And Victini has an okay speed tier and okay special attack, so we can definitely make some use of that. But as for old moves, we also have things like Ball Strike, which is just a really powerful electric coverage. It has U-Turn, Dazzling Gleam for like dark types if you want to run a more special variant, Searing Shot for special variant as well, which has a great chance to burn, equally as good as Scorching Sands. We could run Trick on a Choice Scarf. As I said, U-Turn, Will-O-Wisp team support. So Victini has a huge arsenal of moves at its disposal, so I am looking forward to seeing what people do with it. I personally like the old tried and true Choice Scarf V-Create because it's just really strong, even with only 299 attack. And the Scarf lets you outspeed some significant opponents in the tier, and the 299 attack, but coming off a 180 base stab, it's going to melt basically anything that doesn't resist in the tier. So next up we have Cresselia, and Cresselia is very bulky with a fantastic 120, 120, 130 spread respectively. So with that, it got Cosmic Power. So as I said with Metagross, Cosmic Power will increase your defense and special defensive stage, which is going to throw this thing's bulk through the roof. So that could be really, really hard to break. Now, unfortunately, it is kind of susceptible to things like Toxic or other form of status conditions, but the Cosmic Power will let this thing take a nice hit, especially with fantastic HP. Next up we have Stored Power. So Stored Power allows us to kind of invest not too much in special attack, and Stored Power is going to become stronger and stronger as this thing sets up Cosmic Powers. So Stored Power will increase 20 base every time you increase your status stage. So every time we click Cosmic Power, we will go up 40 base, which is quite nice. So it starts at 20 and then goes to 60 after one Cosmic Power and like 100 after two Cosmic Powers. So that's going to be quite a nice move in my opinion. And then we have Power Swap, which could be really interesting alongside Cosmic Power. So say we're fighting a Pokemon whose idea is like, oh, I'm going to nasty plot in your face, or like Quiver Dance in your face to try and break this Cresselia. You can use Power Swap and take all their stages of special attack, or physical attack it might be, that's trying to break you. So what this lets you do is actually increase your power with Stored Power, as well as not having to have a move to increase your special attack. And this is especially nice because it also lowers your opponent's attack technically, because you are stealing their special attack or attack stages increase, so that could be quite nice. Then for other moves we do have access to Dazzling Gleam, I believe. We don't actually, I thought we had a fairy move. We have Moonblast, even better, so you could run like Stored Power Moonblast. Now unfortunately this will get walled up by like steel types, but the Moonblast is really good for fighting off the dark types, which can give your team hassle. Other than that, we have things like Energy Ball for fighting fighting the ground and water types in the tier, which can be annoying. We have Ice Beam for dragons, for flying types, for ground types. There's just a plethora of things Ice Beam hits. As I said, Moonblast is fantastic coverage to have on a Psychic team. Of course, we have the likes of Psychic, Shadow Ball, which most Psychic types get. We have Thunder Wave, Toxic Trick again, another great set of team support here if you want to run them. We have Trick or Trick Room if you want to be running a Trick Room Psychic team, which I could see rise in popularity. Now, what's pretty important is we have Lunar Dance. And Lunar Dance is basically the same as Healing Wish. You replaces with fully healed with PP. So it looks like it actually restores your PP as well. I actually wasn't aware of that myself, but that could be really good for team support. So Cresselia could come in, for example, like Lunar Dance into your Metagross, for example, who has taken a Flamethrower and eaten its Occa Berry against Volcarona. But against a Bug team, maybe you want your Metagross to come back and do some more work later on, so you can Lunar Dance it all the way back up to full HP. So that could be really good, and I do think Cresselia is going to have some use on a Psychic team. So with that, we're going to pause and look at the next type. I'll be right back. So next up we have Rock type, and this type has come so far since the beginning of the generation, back to when it had like no tools or options at its disposal before it even had Terrakion. Its fastest Pokemon was like base 95 speed, and there was essentially no way it could survive things like Vicious Rend from Dracovish. So the type has come a long way since, and in this DLC it got so many new tools that I am looking forward to discussing, so let's jump right into the team. First up, we have Omastar, and unfortunately Omastar didn't get too much in the new move department. However, I do think Omastar is fantastic on a rock team, as not only does it have great special defense, it has decent defense or good defense to back it up. Now, its HP is a little lackluster and speed is nothing to write home about. However, it does have access to weak armor, which increases its speed by 2 stages after taking a hit. It also has the defense to just about take said hits. So if we want to run, for example, my favourite Omastar set is a Modest with max speed nature. And with that we run a Shocker Berry, and what this lets Omastar do is easily eat an Earthquake, which activates its weak armor, and on the turn it gets hit by an Earthquake. We can also Shell Smash. This puts Omastar's speed up 3 stages, putting it well over 600. As well as increasing its special attack to well over 720. So that's going to be quite nice. And on top of that, we get things like Scald, Earth Power. I believe it gets Giga Drain, or Grass, was it Grass? Oh, it's Hidden Power Grass I used to run, but it gets Ice Beam, which can be quite good. So Scald is fantastic against ground types, for example, against fire types, against a ton of types in the tier. We have Earth Power then to destroy steel types, for example, and Ice Beam against other ground types, against dragons, against the flying types in the tier. So I do think Omastar has a fantastic niche. You can also run Choppleberry, for example, if you're struggling with the fighting matchup and want Omastar to do something similar into close combat. So I definitely think Omastar has some use in the tier, and the reason I prefer these berries over Focus Sash, for example, is because Focus Sash relies on having all the hazards cleared out before we fight the Pokemon, or I don't like Air Balloon as much as well because they can still hit us with like a super effective move. But with the Shocker Berry, people are probably going to instinctively try hit with an Earthquake, for example, and end up activating the Shocker Berry in weak armor. So I am quite looking forward to Omastar coming back. Next up we have Aerodactyl, and Aerodactyl is going to be quite good because it does bring a proper ground immunity to the team. So what Aerodactyl can do is it now has access to Dragon Dance, which is fantastic because it has great speed and pretty decent attack as well. So with Dragon Dance, this thing can become a fantastic late game sweeper with its decent moveset. We have Rock Blast, which is an okay multi-hit rock move if you want to break through things like Sturdy Sashes, or even if you want to try and run a King's Rock, for example, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It is an idea because it does have good Rock Stab and things like Rock Slide or Stone Edge. However, they are somewhat inaccurate, but that is just a drawback you have for playing Rock type. Next up we have Psychic Fangs, which can be great for hitting the fighting types in the tier, as well as smashing through things like Aurora Veil, Reflect, Light Screen, all those kind of screens that can give your team a bit of hassle, so that can be quite a nice tool. And Finally, we have Dual Wing Beat, and Dual Wing Beat's going to be a good flying stab against the fighting types and the grass types in the tier, for example. And I don't want to say it had no flying stab until this point, but its flying stab was somewhat awkward because Fly and Sky Attack are 2-turn moves which can easily be countered by like Protect or Scouting. So Dual Wing Beat is going to be 40 base, but it will be boosted by Stab and hit twice. So after a Dragon Dance, I can see this doing quite a good bit of damage. Now for old moves, Aerodactyl has always been a good like speedy taunt lead because it can taunt and throw down its old Stealth Rocks, for example. As well as that, it has access to things like Iron Head, Ice Fang, which are just decent kind of coverages, as Fire Fang as well, if you are struggling with Steel types, and it has Earthquake, which is really good for Steel types as well. So I do think that Aerodactyl will see quite good use on a flying rock team. Unfortunately, it does not have access to its Mega, but Dragon Dance is a nice compensation prize nonetheless. Next up, we have Aggron. And Aggron got two new tools to its moveset, being Sand Tomb, which is a semi-trapping move. It'll trap for 4 to 5 turns. This could be nice for trapping walls like maybe Toxapex, Slowbro, Amoonguss, things that kind of want to try and wall you out with recovers. Though you do have to be wary of those because 2 of them do have Water Stab, which obviously Aggron does not want to eat up. But this can be used for a plethora of like slower, bulky Pokemon. You can trap them with Sand Tomb. And with this thing's absolutely monstrous defense stat, so I max invested into an Impish Nature. It hits 504, which is just stupidly high. So we could be body pressing your opponents quite easily because this is coming off a 504 attack stat basically, and because it's part Steel type, it was neutral to Steel attacks, so it could be quite nice to Sand Tomb in like a Steel type like Ferrothorn maybe and start body pressing it. We also have access to Iron Defense if you want to boost this well over 1,000 super easily, and suddenly your body presses are going to be destroying your opponents. As well as that, you won't be taking much damage because your defense stat is so ridiculously high. So it also has access to Sturdy and Metal Burst, which is good paired with maybe like Heavy Duty Boots, for example. And the reason I say Heavy Duty Boots is because we can guarantee swap in on entry hazards and survive on 1 HP thanks to Sturdy, and then Metal Burst back and do a ton of damage. So what Metal Burst does, it does 1.5 times the damage back. So it's essentially like Mirror Coat and Counter, but watered down in one. I don't think it has negative priorities, so we do have to rely on your Aggron being slower, which won't be too much of a hassle because Aggron is quite slow. So this could easily do like upwards of 450 damage back to your opponent, especially against something like Vicious Rend. You can just click Metal Burst and get a KO on it, which can be quite nice. So I am looking forward to seeing what kind of assets Aggron bring to the team. Next up we have Cradily, and I am so excited to talk about Cradily, which is kind of surprising. So I do think Cradily is going to serve quite a good use on a rock team. Not only is it grass type, which pairs nicely with the rock type, it has access to Storm Drain, which is going to be fantastic for the rock type because Storm Drain allows it to ease water moves while increasing its special attack. So its ground type brethren like Seismitoad and Gastrodon have already had abilities to absorb water attacks, but rock until now hasn't until the return of Cradily. So that's going to be super good. On top of that, its grass type allows it to eat other things like ground attacks, like Earthquake with relative ease because it is quite bulky. Now, as for new movesets, it got Grassy Terrain, and while this is going to be annoying to have to set your own terrain, what Grassy Terrain does, and we can even run like Terrain Extender, it gives your entire team a bit of bulk against things like Earthquake because of the Grassy Surge. The Grassy Terrain does weaken Earthquake's damage by half, which of course your team really, really values. As well as that, it has access to Grassy Glide, which is going to be so good, I think, on a rock team. So we just see here, it's not terribly offensive with 287, but it does have access to Swords Dance, so we can set up a Grassy Terrain one turn, and the next turn Swords Dance, and suddenly we have 6 turns, we can just click Grassy Glide in the opponent's face. And this is going to be 70 base, boosted by Stab, and boosted by your Grassy Surge, and have priority. This means your Cradily doesn't have to worry about its speed tier at all, which is quite frankly bad, and there's quite a good bit of bulk to back it up. It can't be hit by water moves thanks to Storm Drain, and it's going to shrug off ground attacks quite nicely. So against like the ground matchup, against the water matchup, I think the Grassy Glide is going to be absolutely fantastic. And even not with against those matchups, I think the Grassy Terrain is going to give the team good team support. As for old moves, it still has access to Toxic, it has access to Recover, it has access to Stealth Rock, I think it has access to Infestation as well. It can just be a pretty good team support, bulky anchor. It also has access to Giga Drain if you want to run a specially attacking one, for example, Sludge Bomb for opposing grass types. So I do think this Pokemon is going to see some great usage on the type, and I'm really looking forward to trying out Credilli myself. Next up we have Deontay, and unfortunately Deontay is still going to be quad weak to Steel, which is not the best asset to have on a rock team. However, it does carry a nice immunity to dragon types, as well as a partial resistance to dark types because of its fairy typing, which is always nice to have. As for your stat spread, Deontay is quite bulky, having 150 in both defense and special defense, and this is going to be compounded by the fact you're probably running Sandstorm if you're running a rock team with like Tyranitar, so this thing's special defense is essentially going to be boosted by a stage to 1.5 times because it's part rock type, so we could invest like fully into defense, for example. Let's just see how much we get here. And we'll say full HP, so its HP isn't great, but with leftovers, with potentially like grassy terrain help from your Credilli and the Sandstorm from Tyranitar, this thing's special defense will also be over 450, over 400, almost 500 actually, which is really good because it's going to be nice and bulky. You will have 12% recovery from the likes of Credilli and leftovers. On top of that, we have now access to Mystical Fire, which can be good against steel types. It also lowers their special attack, essentially making Deontay even more specially bulky. We have Encore, which is good for trapping walls or stall attack teams, or just generally slow defensive teams into setting up or forcing to swap out. We have Body Press, which is also going to be quite nice against like dark types and steel types. And we don't even have to invest anything into attack to make this quite nice and strong. We have Meteor Beam if you want a special attacker, but what I think is really good with Body Press is we have access to Diamond Storm, which can increase your defense 2 stages up to well over 460. So 860, my bad. So Body Press is going to be insanely strong. You can just sit on steel types like Ferrothorn, on things like Chansey and Blissey, normal types like Porygon 2, with great ease, and we can actually start to take moves nicely enough because our defense is going to skyrocket through the roof. We could also run something like Calm Mind and Moonblast, for example, if you want to patch up your special defense and special attack, and Moonblast will be great for picking off fighting types, while Calm Mind can patch up your special defense, which is already going to be quite nice thanks to the Sandstorm. So I do see Deontay having quite a good use on the rock type. Now it's not over there, we actually have 2 more Pokemon that didn't fit on the team, so I'm going to pause until we look at the next part of the rock types. I'll be right back. Now finally for the rock type, we do have the Ultra Beasts, which I do think are going to play quite a big role on the rock type. First off with Nihilego, we have Endure, and as I said earlier with other Ultra Beasts, Endure can be quite nice with Salacberry, which gives us effectively the same speed as a Choice Scarf on low HP, while not having to choice lock ourselves into one single attack. Now the problem with this is we are going to be weak to things like hail, status conditions, priority if we are low on HP, so do bear that in mind if you are running this Endure set. Alternatively, we could run, for example, a Power Herb. What? I didn't say Qualifier, I said Power Herb. Power Herb Meteor Beam. So what does this do is increase our special attack a stage, while using Meteor Beam, and the Power Herb will activate it immediately, and we should be able to score a KO, effectively giving Nihilego 2 stages of special attack. This could be paired nicely with maybe a slower, specially defensive Nihilego, we'll say. And the reason I say this is it's boosted by Sandstorm, so its special defense is going to be really, really nice. It can run moves, old moves like Thunderbolt, for example, for water attacks, Dazzling Gleam for fighting dragon and dark types. It has Sludge Bomb and Sludge Wave for the grass types in the tier. We have Clear Smog if we want to reset your opponent's stats back to normal, Power Gem for more reliable rock coverage, Psychic for fighting types as well. So this thing actually has a great move pool in my opinion. We even have access to Toxic Spikes if for some reason you want to run Toxic Spikes on a hazard stacking rock team, which can be done alongside the likes of Shuckle. So I do think Nihilego is going to see some good usage on a rock type. And last but not least, we do have Stakataka. And the reason I highlight Stakataka's defense here is because it actually puts Aggron to shame. It has the same typiness Aggron with even more defense, which is just absolutely crazy. Unfortunately, it doesn't have access to Metal Burst and Sturdy, which is why I did highlight Aggron separately. But this thing can do so much more than just click body press, which yes, it did get coming off at 573 base, so steel types beware of Stakataka. It also got access to Heat Crash, and this thing is quite heavy, meaning it has a really powerful fire attack that can squish grass types, that can squish steel types, and that can squish ice types. It can just do so much. It also has access to Heavy Slam because this thing is, as I said, quite heavy. Which is good Seal Stab, but honestly I prefer Gyro Ball because this thing's speed is absolutely abysmal, so we will see quite a good Gyro Ball user here. Now what a lot of people don't realise is it gets Trick Room, and what Trick Room is good for if we run a Lonely Nature Stakataka, just to max out its attack slightly more than its defense. This is the exact spread you want, Lonely with 13 IVs in defense. So what this lets us do is have just one more point in attack than defense. And I usually pump the rest either into HP or my special defense, for example. And we can set up a Trick Room. Suddenly Stakataka is super fast because it's 31 speed. It's going to outspeed or outslow, depending on how you look at it, most of the tier thanks to Trick Room. Now we can run things like Heat Crash, which we now get. We can run things like Gyro Ball for stab. We can run Body Press if we want. I think it gets Superpower as well. We can run even Stone Edge. So what this lets us do is score a KO, and maybe item-wise, I would typically run a Z Crystal in the old one, but obviously we can't do that anymore, so maybe a Life Orb for that immediate bit more power. So what we can do is simply score a KO with one of our extremely powerful 397 120 base Gyro Balls or 100 base stab Stone Edges, for example, and this increases our attack stage to almost 600, making Stakataka a really good late game sweeper because this thing will become really strong and snowball into something super offensive. So I am actually terrified to do a Stakataka against like more offensive teams, so it can just needs the opportunity to come in and set up Trick Room, and suddenly you're eating stab Gyro Balls, stab Stone Edges, super effective Heat Crashes, for example. So that's going to be it for the rock type, and we're going to pause till we look at the next type. We'll be right back. So next up we do have Steel type, and Steel type has always been a good type in Monotypes in my opinion, and a lot of the reason for that is because of Heatran carrying an immunity to fire, as well as the flying types having nice access to ground immunity and neutrality to fighting, and lo and behold, some of those are back. So let's look into the team and see what we have. So first up we have Heatran, and Heatran got Body Press, which is going to be quite nice because we can invest in like a defensive Heatran and have that nice fighting coverage, but it also got Scorching Sands, which is going to be really nice for spreading burns among your opponent, especially if they do resist Lava Plume, for example. So Scorching Sands alongside Lava Plume can give your opponent give you a really good chance to burn your opponent across two different attacks. And why Heatran is so good on a Steel team is because it access to Flash Fire, and Flash Fire makes it effectively immune to fire attacks, which is obviously super important on a Steel type, it being one of its only 3 weaknesses. Now on top of this, it still has access to Stealth Rock. It has like access to Eruption if you want to run a Choice Scarf Eruption user, which can be boosted further by Flash Fire. It has access to Magma Storm if you want a powerful Trapper. As well as that, it just has good access to Earth Power, Steel coverage, like, or Steel Stab Taunt Will-O-Wisp if we want a kind of supportive Heatran, and that, on top of that, it has really good stats. It has great special attack, it's quite bulky with 106 defense and special defense and a nice 91 HP, so I do see Heatran being a key cornerstone member of the Steel type, and I look forward to trying it out on the team. Next up we have one of my most terrified Pokemon, Celesteela. And Celesteela is just so bulky. It mightn't look as immediately bulky as things like Corviknight and Skarmory, which are both flying steel types, but it now has access to Cosmic Power, increasing its defense and special defensive stage every time it clicks it, which is just going to be insanely bulky, especially paired alongside Leech Seed for longevity. It has Beast Boost, meaning every time it scores a KO, its highest stat will increase a stage, which is going to be super nice. We have Body Slam if you do want to try and spread paralysis while also doing some chip, though if you want paralysis, actually it doesn't get Thunder Wave, so that is going to be the only way it can spread paralysis, it seems, which is going to be quite good. Now, moveset wise, it has some nice special attacks like Flamethrower, Flash Cannon against Giga Drain. We have access to good physical moves like Superpower, Stone Edge, Seed Bomb, Rock Slide, Zen Headbutt, Earthquake. So this thing doesn't have a shortage of good moves. So I definitely see Celesteela being a key member to come in and eat things like Earthquake, for example, to eat fighting attacks and spread some team supported Leech Seed, which can give your team longevity from swapping into an attack and getting the HP back. So personally, I'm terrified to be having to fight Celesteela again, but looking forward to seeing what it can do. Now next up we have Metagross, and I don't think Metagross is going to be exactly a meta-defining Pokemon. There's also got Steel Roller, but I do think there could be some potential use for Metagross. With Cosmic Power, it can be a bit more bulky, but where I think Metagross truly shines on a Steel team is its Psychic typing, so it has access to good Psychic Stab in Zen Headbutt, which can fend off the fighting types nicely in the tier, while it also carries neutrality to fighting type. Now unfortunately, things like Wicked Blow from Urshifu are still going to be quite dangerous for it, so you do have to bear that in mind, as fighting types will be running Urshifu pretty much 100% of the time. Steel Roller can also be quite nice against opponents who like to rely on their terrain, for example like electric attacker teams who like electric terrain to get their Alolan Raichu to sweep you. You can Steel Roll away their electric terrain. For fairy types, they have a plethora of terrains to choose from. For the grass type, trying to Grassy Glide you or just have the passive recovery, it can be quite nice to remove those terrains. And last but not least, we have Stakataka again. Now, Stakataka is going to be monstrous because its defense is ridiculous, and if you want a bit more information on Stakataka, do check out the rock section. I have a timestamp down below. I've discussed all the different things Stakataka can do, but I will do it again here quickly. So Stakataka's monstrous defense can be paired really nicely with Body Press. What I think is really important is with access to Trick Room. So Trick Room is really good because its speed stat is absolutely abysmal, and if we run a Lonely Nature Stakataka, we can have its physical attack surpass its special physical attack surpass its defense by one stage, meaning every time it gets a beast boost it will increase its attack instead of its defense, while still having fantastic defense, and the rest you can pump into HP or special defense to make it more bulky, for example. Item wise, we used to run Z Crystals, but you could run Leftovers for longevity or maybe Life Orb for that immediate bit more power. And moveset wise, we have access to a stupidly powerful Gyro Ball, which is Stab. We have Body Press, we have Heat Crash, we have Stone Edge, we have Superpower. We have all kinds of great moves on this thing, so I do think Stakataka is going to be quite nice. As well as that, because of its rock typing, it's going to be taking neutral damage from things like fire attacks. Though do bear in mind it is doubly weak to ground and fighting, two types that the steel type can kind of struggle with. So make sure if you are running this to pair it with something like Corviknight, Skarmory or Celesteela to be able to eat those attacks. So that is going to be it from steel type. Let's pause there till we look at the next type. I'll be right back. So finally we do have the water type, and in my opinion, and I don't think this is terribly controversial to say, I think the water type was the best type in the monotype meta in the current DLC patch that was just here, the Isle of Armor. So let's see what water got, and I wonder will it still remain top tier based on a lot of the other threats that other types got. So first up we got Suicune. So with Suicune back, the only notable new move it had is Air Slash, which it had previously from an event exclusive move, so now it has that as a non-event exclusive move and can be run alongside other event exclusive moves, I believe. So now, Suicune is quite bulky with 115 defense, special defense, and 100 HP, which can be paired quite nicely with pressure ability if you want to have like a slower pressure stalling Pokemon. So what I like to use is like the Calm Mind substitute set, for example, with leftovers, and we can run Scald and Ice Beam, we'll say, for like the grass types. So what this lets us do is kind of just be very bulky. I usually run a max defense nature to take a nice hit. Put up a sub in someone's face, and because it has 404 HP, the sub will have enough HP to just guarantee take one Seismic Toss or Nightshade and not break. And that's super important against things like Chansey, against ghost types that like to use Nightshade, like Corsola maybe, because they cannot break you in one hit. This lets you get your HP recovery thanks to leftovers twice, while pressure stalling them to have to use 4 PP to break your sub once, which is quite good. Then we have Calm Mind, so we can Calm Mind behind the sub and increase our special defense, making it even harder for your opponent to break the sub. Now you can spread burns with Scald, for example, and make it even harder for your opponent to break your sub because you're a nice defense stat. And we have Ice Beam then for dealing with things that have water absorb, like water ground types. We have Cradilly. You have all the grass types in the tier who like to eat water attacks, so Ice Beam can be quite nice for those, and dragons as well. So I think Suicune can be quite nice on a defensive water team, especially with a good defensive backbone with like Toxapex and Slowbro, for example. I do see Suicune having some use. Next up we have Swampert, and Swampert is a little bit bulkier and a little bit stronger than its friend Seismitoad, but it is that bit slower, so do bear that in mind. It doesn't have access to Swift Swim if you like using Seismitoad as a Swift Swimmer. What Swampert does have, however, is access to Bulk Up, Darkest Lariat, and Liquidation now, thanks to the DLC, which is pretty good. So I would run Liquidation over Waterfall because it allows you to potentially lower your opponent's physical defense stage, while a Waterfall lets you flinch, but its speed tier isn't amazing, so I would typically like to go for the Liquidation over that. Darkest Lariat can be nice for things like Bulk Up Corviknight, for example, who wants to try and bulk up in your face and body press you because it will ignore its defense changes. And then finally has access to Bulk Up itself, which is good because it has nice attack with 110 and decent 90 defense with pretty nice HP at 1 base 100. So the thing is quite bulky and can eat up electric types thanks to its ground typing, though do bear in mind it is quad weak to grass, like the other water ground types. It can also throw on Stealth Rocks, which can be nice. It has access to Earthquake as well, which is good stab. We have nice fighting coverage. I believe it gets close combat now, actually. I don't think I listed that, so don't quote me on that. Actually, let me check just quickly. Does Swampert get close combat? It does not. I could have sworn I read somewhere it got close combat, but I guess we're going to have to stick to the likes of Superpower if you want Fighting Stab, which isn't bad necessarily. So I definitely think we could see some use for Swampert on the team. We have Torrent if you want to make its water stab even stronger, especially in the rain. Or we have Damp to stop opponents from exploding or using things like, I believe it stops Misty Explosion as well. Next up we have Volcanion. So why I think Volcanion is good on a water team, it gives it nice access to a proper fire coverage and fire stab, and this is nice for dealing with things like Ferrothorn or other grass types which kind of wall out your team. As well as that, having resistance to Freeze Dry is nice because Freeze Dry can really hurt your entire team. Now do bear in mind, if you are running Flamethrower on a rain team, the rain will weaken the fire stab, so be careful when you're going to be clicking this. On top of that, it has access to Steam Eruption, which is a really powerful water stab with a 30% chance to burn. So it's essentially Super Scald, and we all know Scald is an amazing move, so this is really nice to have. We also have access to Defog, and this can be paired nicely with Volcanion's access to Heavy Duty Boots, for example. So Defog can clear away annoying hazards for your team. What else it can do is it has Sludge Wave or Sludge Bomb for grass types or fairies, especially in the rain when your flamethrower is weakened. And finally, we do have earth power for things like opposing Toxapex, which can give your team hassle. On top of that, it does have actually really good special attack at 130, so we could even run a Specs, for example, if we really wanted to, and have defog elsewhere, because the team does have decent access to defog, and this puts this special attack at nearly 600 while still being quite bulky. And finally, we have Tapu Fini. So Tapu Fini is going to be really good cornerstone of a defensive water team because it has access to Misty Surge, which allows you to swap in on Pokemon and not be status from things like Toxic Spikes. It can't be paralyzed if your ally is in the Misty Surge. With that, we have Flip Turn, which is going to be really good for like grabbing momentum. So you can take in Tapu Fini, set your Misty Terrain up, and Flip Turn into something else. We have Misty Explosion, which is going to be a powerful stab move because it is doubled in power in your terrain. But as well as that, it can be a good wall break option or a good option to keep up momentum. So maybe your opponent swaps out and you want to just explode in their face, for example. I don't know why you wouldn't want to Flip Turn. Maybe they have a Water Absorb Pokemon. But you want to get out your ally Pokemon, so you can click Misty Explosion and keep up momentum. Next up, we have Draining Kiss, which is very weak but has really, really good recovery. So that could pair nicely with, for example, a Calm Mind, which it used to get. So Calm Mind and Draining Kiss can really keep Tapu Fini alive and give it great longevity, especially paired with something like Leftovers. And we have Store Power, which is going to be really good, especially if we are running that Calm Mind build, because the Store Power will get stronger and stronger. Now with, again, a defensive backbone of something like Slowbro and Toxapex, I can see Tapu Fini having a great time swapping around. We have access to Haze for team support, or access to defog for team support, as well as just having access to things like Moonblast, which is great stab, Ice Beam, which is good coverage, and finally Scald or Surf if you want more water boosted moves in the rain. So that is going to be it from the water type. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to pause until I do my sign off. So thank you all so much for watching this if you made it this far. I really do appreciate the support. Definitely let me know below what you think about the video format. If you thought maybe it was a bit too long, maybe I could shorten it next time I waffled on too much, or you actually really liked the format, you liked how I went in depth into every type. Just any kind of feedback like that, I really do appreciate. So definitely leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff helps me out so much. And most importantly, let me know down below what you think of the new DLC. What are you looking forward to using? What are your thoughts on the returning Pokemon? I'd love to have that discussion. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.